It's Joyce. Dan, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, we are live on YouTube. Katie Will is going to call you.
Okay.
The link did not work, but I was able to turn it live, so he's going to redirect people on the stream. So he's going to put a note in. It is running live right now as we speak. So it should be good to go. Unfortunately, the link that people got will be incorrect. So we're going to do everything we can to get that correct information out.
Got it.
So I'm not sure what happened. It was something internal here in Zoom. So at least we're streaming right now. So when they come back together, we'll be on live, but we just got to get the new link out to people.
Joyce, and not that anyone will necessarily go back on board docs, but can you update the new link on there in case someone does go there?
Absolutely. Thank you. I will do that. I will make sure Will sends it to me and I'll get it on there. Dan, can you, oh, never mind.
Are you updating the link now, Joyce?
Yeah, Katie and Will are working on it and I'm just waiting to get the link and I'll put it on board docs.
Okay, can you put it on the website too? When
Yep,
we're with
Katie's doing that.
it? Okay, great, thank you.
You bet.
So Elizabeth, they're playing hockey in Cedarburg.
Too soon.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah, it's too soon.
I hope she has a big helmet on.
Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do this year. Our Learn to Skate is canceled, so I don't know.
Oh,
Elliot and Tyson are thinking about, like, I don't know. Tyson's got some plan about some dry land practice, and then eventually when we build our rink, trying to do a little Learn to Skate back there.
Just
Oh.
FYI, we're streaming on the video on.
Thank you, Peter.
YouTube right now.
oh. So they can catch up on hockey too.
That's right.
It's a little hockey talk pre-board meeting.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to mention too, I mentioned this earlier, if anybody was on the Wisconsin Leadership Summit at 8 o'clock this morning, Danielle was on just an excellent panel, just excellent. And she talked a lot about Monona Grove and what Monona Grove was doing and what she did this summer. So it was really nice to have that kind of real live input from somebody that was 2 feet on the ground doing the work. It was really neat.
Peter, can you post the new link to the old YouTube page?
No, because the way the YouTube software works, it doesn't let you post links in the chat. However, I am saying that I've just said you can go to the My Community Media page and you'll find it there.
Okay.
I tried that. Doesn't let you post a link in the chat.
Okay, so then that means, do we just go ahead and just continue, or do we need to start over?
I mean, I think we should probably start over. Start.
Well, I don't think, Dan, we had anything that significant in the details. I think we can proceed.
Okay.
We really just went over the background, so.
All right. I think everybody's back. Okay. So go ahead, Dan, you can go ahead and share your screen and then go ahead and continue.
Okay, thank you.
So what did we decide about answering the question about connection?
I will answer it, and yeah,
Okay.
I'll answer that question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we had just reviewed, the timeline that brought us here this evening of all the decisions that were made earlier by the board, orders and guidance by public health and DHS and others. And so we talked about the process that we've used in order to develop our instructional plans. One of the things that we talked about with the virtual learning is, really emphasizing that we want to have a quality virtual learning instructional model. And we have, as you know, been experiencing some difficulties with Chromebooks and connectivity. And so our team has been, problem solving, troubleshooting, since day one. We did just get an update this week. I just forwarded that message to our board members, so you have it in writing, but I'll read that. A message that was sent to staff this week from Casey Heineken, our technology coordinator. So Casey and her team have been working not only with HP and Google, but as well as neighboring school districts who are all experiencing the exact same issues. And we did have some positive news that we think might be promising this week. The HP and Google developers have been working to isolate the processing issue and allow for a better video conferencing experience. They recently pushed out an update. Most updates happen automatically, but with students remote right now, we want to make sure that they have the information they need. So our staff has been given information they can share with students so that they can manually update their Chromebooks. And then we'll certainly, with this new update, be monitoring very carefully to see if that solves or improves our experiences. And then, one of the other things that we should be aware of, that if this proves not to be sufficient, we are looking at additional alternatives, including potentially new devices. If that were the case, that would come to the board, for consideration, since that would certainly be, an additional expense. So we'll keep you updated here as we go, and there should be an update very shortly on that.
So Dan, I just want to be able to reassure the people that are affected on this issue. If a teacher has 90% of their students who are getting disconnected, and that would still be happening right now, right? Is that correct?
It varies widely, depending on the classes. So
again, I think part of it is that we get asked this question, and I'm looking, I think, for a way that you would like us to respond. And that is that you've got a manual update that's going to be provided to the students who have the Chromebooks. Is that correct?
Right.
And that they're going to be receiving instructions on how to do the manual. The students themselves are going to do it, right?
Yeah. So that's already been communicated from teachers to their students, or is in the process, I should say. This just went out to teachers yesterday. So I shouldn't.
And then how will we monitor the success of that?
Well, our teachers will continually provide, feedback to our IT team.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, do you have, Dan, do you have a level? So if, let's say 50% of the students are getting the manual update is working, and it isn't working for 50%, you're going to be able to, what's the time frame for the students to get the manual update and hopefully get that implemented? Would you say a week or 3 days? Or
I don't know what the specific timeline. I would think as soon as possible, within days.
Okay, that helps. And if it's not successful, what's just a general time frame for remedying that problem? Because if we have 100% of those students who are on the Chromebooks on virtual, I think they're just trying to get some idea of if this doesn't work.
Our team is working on it daily, so it'll be continually regular updates, and very soon move on to the next potential solution.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so that leads us to, we've talked about, and we're going to talk a little bit more, here tonight about the timeline and process but we know that our process involved the idea of a phased reopening. And so, as I mentioned, that our team has been working on finalizing a hybrid model for reopening. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Lisa Hype, our Director of Instruction, who is going to take us through the development and the details of that instructional model.
Great. Good evening, everyone. And it's my pleasure to share with you some of the details surrounding the hybrid model that our team determined would be our first choice in a reopening for 4K through 2 students. The model is called ABAB, and those reference cohorts of students. So you would have a cohort and a B cohort. Students would attend face-to-face in their schools for 2 days, and you can see the description of how that would rotate. But the A cohort would come on Monday, face-to-face. The B cohort would then arrive on Tuesday, face-to-face. The A cohort would return face-to-face on Thursday, and the B cohort would have face-to-face again on Friday. We also have an option for all students and families if they wish to remain in 100% virtual learning. That is an option, and those students will just call cohort C so that they have a designation as well. One of their primary considerations was knowing that we may have to pivot back and forth between in-person instruction and returning to 100% virtual if there were to be outbreaks of infection and a need to quarantine or isolate. And so we really wanted to make sure that the students' virtual school schedule was very similar to the face-to-face school schedule. So again, it would be at least jarring for students if they had to pivot back and forth. And in this ABAB model, students could maintain that same schedule that would have 4 different lesson blocks of ELA, math, social studies, science, morning meetings, SEL work, community building, and some related arts instruction as well. We also know that in order to maintain the physical distancing requirements, that we cannot return all students together. So that's why the cohort model has to exist. But that does mean that some students, when they're not face-to-face, are receiving instruction, again, virtually, and they have to complete that instruction at home. Activities such as independent practice, extension activities, application activities are things that students would be working on during that independent virtual time when they are not face-to-face in their classroom. Dan, next slide.
Hey, I have a question, Lisa, just about that, what you just went over.
Oh, sure.
With the ABAB model and the cohort B or C model, did anybody consider going back to just a full instructional model rather than a hybrid, even if it was a partial day? Because looking at what was presented here, and I might be going a little bit ahead, but it seems like there's going to be a drop in instruction for those 2 days that the students are not going in person. Because I know you said it's virtual, but it's independent virtual. Am I right? Do I understand that correctly?
I think I can cover it on a future slide, okay, Eric. And if I don't, please bring that back up and I'll be glad to address it. But I think we have a mock week and a mock day schedule for you to look at that might explain it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I tried to highlight some of these and I won't read a slide to you, but some of the reasons why, again, we really elevated the ABAB model was we wanted to make sure that students had some face-to-face instruction with their teacher before they needed to transition into the independent virtual. And that way the teacher could really guide that at-home learning in a way that was setting it up for success for students. Some of the other hybrid models that are out there do have lengthier periods of time where students are independent virtual without seeing their teachers face-to-face. And we wanted to really sort of stay away from long periods of time where students were independent virtual. We also wanted to make sure that our teachers were able to maintain some daily prep as much as possible, because we know that there are plenty of things that come teachers' ways beyond just the day-to-day teaching with students. That includes responding to emails, following up with students who might not be face-to-face that day, and other tasks that might be with their grade level team or others. And so having some prep during the day was important as well. Dan has mentioned safety a few times and the opportunity to clean thoroughly. I'll just mention one of the models we looked at was an AM/PM model, but that really left not a lot of time for cleaning in between the cohorts. And an AB/AB model did allow for sufficient cleaning to happen at the end of a day before the next cohort would come the next day. Continuing.
I have a question. I'm sorry if I can ask a question about that. Did you consider one group Monday, Tuesday, and another group Thursday, Friday, rather than Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday? And there's a safety issue involved there. Can you tell me
Sure.
your thoughts?
Yep, we did consider the AA/BB model. That was one of the other models that we presented to teachers and received feedback on. Again, an AA/BB model would have a cohort come 2 days in a row, like Peter just described. But as cohort A, if they're attending Monday, Tuesday, that means that cohort B is independent virtual Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so that's 3 days of independent virtual without a touch point with their teacher face-to-face. And the AB/AB model does allow for that more regular touch point before going to independent virtual. The cleaning that would happen in AB/AB, as we have found out, the cleaning is sufficient to happen at the end of a day before the next day. The thought that you needed to have more time in between cohorts really we've received more information on just the cleaning that needs to happen and the safety factors that would allow students to return one day after the other.
You know, I don't think cleaning is a big factor. All the data we have on this virus says the real danger is face-to-face airborne transmission rather than transmission from surfaces. Not that cleaning is not a bad idea. It's just that that's not the risk that we have to be most concerned about. My concern is when you go Monday to Thursday, Tuesday to Friday, rather than 2 days once a week, is that you substantially increase the risk that if one student does become infected with this, that they're more likely to come into the school when they're infected before they start showing symptoms. You essentially double that risk. And so you are actually increasing the risk that they will be in the building spreading the virus if you do AB/AB rather than AA/BB. Because it's essentially, I don't know, it's a little bit complicated to get there, but there
No,
is.
I understand what you're saying, Peter, but I think, yeah, I mean, it was something that we discussed. I think that you can be asymptomatic for more than a day or even 2 or 3 days. So, you know, it is important to note. I appreciate you bringing this up. This is a decision that is a very difficult decision to make because to be completely safe, right? You would not, you know.
Well, I want to make sure that you are considering all the factors.
Yes.
That's all. That's what my
you.
question is.
Yeah, we certainly did.
Thanks.
Susan Fox, did you have a question?
No, I was just having trouble following why that would be a bigger issue, but I get it. As you went on and talked about it, I guess. So never mind.
It's a little complicated, but
right. Yeah.
It does,
but it is on the list of things that they looked at. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Susan Manning.
I do want to mention, so the community is aware, that we are seriously committed to the cleaning factor. Dr. Mackey, who's internationally known, UW infectious disease, spoke for 2 hours today. And again, went over in great detail what they still don't know about the transmission of the virus, understanding it's airborne, but they still are not convinced that wearing the masks appears to be the safest thing you can do. Wearing the masks with a plastic shield, so we may want to consider that for the teachers. But it's also the issue of cleaning the surfaces, because if you expose, if it's on your hands and you touch your face, and they haven't for sure determined that that isn't a transmission yet. So I think it's great that that administration has really evaluated that is the cleaning issue, and I think we have to stay very consistently tuned in to responding to that. So I think it's, I'm not wild about this schedule either. I'd like him to go 4 days a week, half days. And are you going to talk about that at some point?
Yeah, I think she's not finished explaining all this. So
Yeah.
Continue.
Is it all right if I continue?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Okay, thank you. One of the reasons that the ABAB model, again, was elevated in our choice was because it did allow for teachers to mirror the at-home virtual learning schedule and keep students on a fairly common or consistent experience. And that lessened the potential inequities of the instruction that students were receiving. Susan Manning had mentioned the AM/PM model. I'll talk just briefly. In that model, in order to get 2 cohorts in every day, the amount of time you would have with students would be significantly reduced in each day. And the focus or content that you're addressing would be narrowed as well. And so it was really hard to replicate the same experience students were having in a virtual learning environment. Also, it is difficult for particularly our youngest learners sometimes to have that same sort of level of concentration when it comes to those short periods of time where they're transitioning from arriving on the bus. They might be then having to, if it's winter, take off snow pants and whatnot, get into the classroom. So if we then have them in the classroom, they're engaged in some learning, transitioning to their next learning activity. All of that can be a little challenging. And then before we know it, students are packing up and transitioning back home for the rest of their day. And then experiencing, they would experience independent virtual for the rest of that day. When we talked about this with our teachers and our staff, again, it's appealing. The number one appealing thing about the AM/PM is that you saw students every day. That hands down is a significant benefit. But coupling that with the reduced time that you would see them each day and not able to have the sort of equitable experience that kids are having in virtual learning, but also the 4K2 model, if it was AM/PM, could not be expanded to grades 3 through 12. And we thought that would just cause another, if we then had to bring all kids back, we wanted a model that we could consistently expand to all of the grades as much as possible. So that was something that we had considered, and those were some of the reasons that, again, we elevated the AB model.
Okay, Eric?
Okay.
So I have a question about that, Lisa or Dan, whoever wants to answer it. We don't know the number of people or students that would opt for a hybrid or in-person learning. So how do we know that we wouldn't be able to serve a certain amount of X students if we don't have that information in a 4-day learning model per week? Because I would assume there would be a fair amount, maybe even a majority, that would like to continue the virtual based on the feedback that I have. But then there would also be probably a smaller amount of students that would want to have that in-person learning. So I guess I'm a little, I think there's information out there we don't have to make those decisions. I'm just wondering how you came to decide that.
Sure. Some of the information we used, and you're right, we obviously will have to survey families and ask them their preference, but we don't want to survey until we know which model we're describing to them so they can make an informed decision. But we do have other districts, neighboring districts, and we can see what percentage of their families chose which option. And we also can look at, I know this landscape is changing daily, weekly sometimes, but we do have survey results from families just earlier in the year. I think we surveyed them last in June about potentially, if we were to reopen, their comfort level sending students back. So, our hypothesis is we'd probably end up around, maybe 25 to 35% of students might choose to stay at home in virtual, but we would see the majority of our students choosing to return. If that were to not be the case, Eric, right, that would impact the model.
I mean, really, we don't know that. We can only estimate. We don't know that.
Correct.
So we're making an assumption just based on, like you said, the other districts and previous knowledge of.
Correct.
But ideally, to really understand that, we should do another survey, is what you're saying.
We absolutely would. But again, want to be able to have a family make a choice based on the actual model we would be going into. And since we wanted to present this to the board before surveying families, the survey would be forthcoming.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? When you talk about this model being more appropriate if we start bringing back, say, 3rd through 5th graders, can you just say a little bit about why that's the case?
Sure.
Why the transition would be easier with this than with the everyday half day?
Sure. One of the most significant impacts with the AM/PM model is transportation. If you can imagine, you're bringing one cohort in the morning, and then you're bringing that morning cohort home, and then you're turning right around and you're bringing in a new cohort, and then you're bringing that second cohort home in the afternoon. For 4K through 2, we knew that our transportation could handle that quick turnaround for that number of students. But as you start adding more students into the transportation mix, it becomes more and more challenging to move that number of students that quickly. So that was a barrier.
And move them safely.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of numbers.
Correct.
And now, and tell me if you're going to get to this, when we talk about this being closer matched with the virtual, when I look at how the blocks are, the block, the timing is the same in the day, so I get that. But now the kids who are in person are only getting those blocks where there's the active teaching 2 days a week. So, and then the rest is, will there be some asynchronous stuff at least for them or any maybe possibility of some related arts activities that might even be synchronous on some of those off days? Or it just seems like Wednesday plus now 2 more days of totally independent, totally online with no even asynchronous would be hard. And I know we're not asking our teachers to do both virtual and in person, so.
Right. So I think in the next couple of slides, we'll look more closely at the schedule. So I think that would answer it, Susan.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that's what you said, sorry.
Can I just, and you probably are going to answer that with this question too, but as you go through that schedule, it will be helpful for us to be able to see, because right now when we look at the schedules, it looks like the students who come in person then have effectively no in-person on their virtual for the other 2 days or 3 days, because it says virtual learning instead of the other type. Will you be, when you do the schedule, are you going to kind of talk about that? And
Yep.
so, but
let me go through the schedule.
as they're thinking about choosing, so right now in the virtual, are students on all 4 days getting learning with teachers, the synchronous learning, at some point on all of those 4 days?
Dan, can you flip to the next slide, please? I think I can address Susan and
Okay.
I can't remember if it was Eric now or some of those questions looking at the slides. Okay. So cohort A would, again, be coming in person on Mondays and Thursdays. When they're face-to-face, they are receiving all of their instruction with the focus of their teacher on them for the 8:30 to 2:30 time. Their schedule while they're in school would still include a morning meeting. They would have 4 lesson blocks. They would have some time for recess, again, physically distant, so it would look very different than the recess they're probably used to, but there would be some movement in the day. Also, there's a related arts block that is included as well, and then a closure to the day. That time for independent virtual, there would be still a touch point in the morning with the teacher, with the students who are at home. So that morning meeting would be still a synchronous opportunity during the independent virtual. But the rest of the day would be asynchronous learning. So again, the lessons that the teacher maybe introduced on Monday would be followed up with on Tuesday for more independent practice. Perhaps it's a project that a student is spending some time on, or an application activity, or something that extends their learning. So Monday, they would be getting instruction face-to-face, knowing that that instruction would have some tasks or activities that would extend into the independent learning day. What we're keeping Wednesday in place for the teacher co-planning, so all those teams can meet together. And so again, for students, that would be the independent virtual learning, but there would still be the all class morning meeting. So whether you were cohort A or cohort B, you would still attend a morning meeting on that Wednesday, which would allow teachers just to, again, be a touch point for their students as they would prepare to learn that day.
But then I'm sorry. I just have a question kind of related to that. So then that means though the rest, that's their only touch point is first thing in the morning, right? And then the rest of the day, they really are on their own. I mean, if they are having issues or something.
Correct. Because
we're meeting at every day though, or let's say.
Yes.
Yeah, on Wednesday as well. So
Yeah.
that was my question before, I guess, because when it says here for cohort A on Tuesday, there's independent and virtual learning. If the virtual learning, it's sounding to me like it's more really independent learning, like
Right.
maybe some asynchronous, and I don't even know if teachers are going to be able to prepare asynchronous video type thing, or if it's all on paper or.
Well, I'll add
if I can get through
Keep
this
going.
slide and the
Okay.
next slide, again, I think those 2 slides might answer those
wait,
questions.
hold on, Lisa. I do want to make a comment because I can tell, I can say from experience from someone in first grade who's going through what is now cohort C, that I'm, and this is what's best for me. I know not going to be the same for everybody else, but there is that virtual learning 2.0 is getting very, very, I am very pleased with how it's going. And I do feel like My daughter is engaged during those virtual learning parts, and having the one day is not ideal with the independent virtual learning, but it works. I can't imagine having, 2 or 3 days of independent virtual learning and how that is going to be equitable for the students in cohort A and B compared to cohort C, with the method of face-to-face instruction that cohort C would be getting compared to the instruction that cohort A and B would be getting. So I just have an issue with that. And I don't know, this doesn't seem to solve the problem that I see so far.
Well,
I
no, thank
agree
you
with
for
that.
sharing that.
I agree with that.
I
I
think
had the
that
exact same concern.
Hey,
all of these choices are difficult choices. None of these models are perfect. They all have challenges and they all have benefits. And so again, that's why families would have a choice in which model that they remained in. But I also want to make it a point about the teacher workload, because asking teachers to try to be in multiple modes at the same time really is a disservice to the students who are even coming face to face for the 2 days. So if you can imagine asking a teacher to teach to the 10 students that might be in front of them in the classroom, while simultaneously trying to also manage the 10 students who would appear on a computer screen because they're zooming in. I know some districts are trying to make things like that work, but I'll tell you the load of stress and just almost like an impossible task to ask teachers to balance simultaneous instruction in both virtual and face-to-face. So that's why teachers would be teaching either in the hybrid model, or some teachers would remain in the virtual model. So there would not be trying to do those both. But the point Eric makes is, yes, that is, a point of this model, is that there are independent virtual days that are less facilitated than what students are receiving now in the independent virtual, which is a highly facilitated experience for the students.
Susan, man.
I'm still seriously struggling with this, because what you're going to offer is 2 days of in-person, but then the other 2 days are going to be dramatically different than the quality and level of the virtual that's being provided to the full virtual. So this choice is becoming very, very complicated and complex, because you're not giving them, it's not just a straight choice of going in person. It's saying, if I go in person, I am actually also accepting a significant decrease in the teacher virtual teaching time for the other 2 days. So it's not a clean, I think it needs to be very clear to the families that this is not a clean in-person choice.
It definitely will be different than what they have experienced in virtual learning 2.0 on the independent virtual learning days. But I want to just address the amount of time that teachers are with students synchronously right now.
Okay.
Every day you get a 30-minute morning. And again, maybe the next slide is a better illustration, Dan, if you move to the next slide.
Yeah.
But right now, there's
Lisa,
a synchronous morning meeting that lasts 30 minutes. And then there is a mini lesson or a lesson launch, which is part of each of those lesson blocks that may last 10 minutes.
Okay.
And then students are in asynchronous learning unless it is their turn in the week for some small group with the teacher. So when you add that up, you're maybe seeing a student synchronously with their teacher approximately maybe 2 hours of time out of this 6-hour day of the virtual learning 2.0. When you add that up across 4 days, you're looking at maybe 8 hours total of synchronous time. When you have 2 days of face-to-face, that is the 6 hours. I mean, again, there's a little recess time and lunch, etc., but you're still with your teacher for about 12 hours. So the difference is the asynchronous is happening here on virtual learning 2.0 interspersed with the synchronous. So you're getting both during the day. In the
So Lisa-
hybrid, the students are coming full-time face-to-face twice a week and getting all of the synchronous on the other day, the asynchronous on the other days.
So where's my schedule C in terms of what the virtual students are getting? Because when I look at the sample daily schedule, I get down to C and it says continues with synchronous and asynchronous opportunities. Where's,
Well,
I
and
need to
then
be able
it
to,
follows the same schedule listed above for students in-person learning. So that same schedule that is described here, 8:30 to 9 morning meeting, 9 to 10 lesson block 1, etc. That is what cohort C is experiencing in virtual learning 2.0.
so effectively in virtual learning, you're getting everything you would if you were in person, except you're doing it virtually versus in person. So if I were going to write on the schedule, the sample daily schedule for cohorts A and B, the morning meeting would be synchronous, right? The lesson block, all of that is, except maybe lunch and recess, is with the teacher. And that is,
It's a mix of synchronous and asynchronous.
So in other words,
Andrew?
the blocks are broken down differently,
Mhm.
right? I mean, that for the cohort C, the virtual as it currently is, those
Mhm.
blocks aren't full blocks of teacher. What she was saying is there might be a 10-minute introduction to a lesson, then
Correct.
kids go off and work or go into small groups, et cetera. So
Correct.
it's a different type of teaching. It's not straight on, the whole thing. I'm sorry.
Currently,
Elizabeth,
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Lisa, for presenting this to us. I think there's kind of a couple of things. I think for us as a board, it's important to not draw like false equivalencies around like, here's what this thing looks like and here's what that thing looks like. Because as Lisa was talking about, you sort of look at the block and you're like, oh yeah, maybe you're getting, more, face-to-face instruction virtual. But I think Lisa's point is a really good one in that what you get in a hybrid model is like the aggregate time of consistent, continuous adult support within a block of a day, 2 days, versus in the virtual. And I 100% agree with Eric in terms of like the quality of the virtual, I think has been really great. I mean, I can speak personally as a parent that, my son is learning and growing quite a bit, but it is different in that there's a touch point that lasts for a short amount of time, right? And then there's an asynchronous activity that goes along with it. And so for my colleagues that aren't familiar with how the asynchronous activities work, they're not all like this, but generally speaking, there's like a video where there's a teacher who's talking about what the lesson is, providing the instruction for it. And then on the subsequent slides, there's the opportunity to interact with that lesson, right? So you may record a thing or move things around or whatever else, but that's how those lessons are set up. And so just so for everyone for line of sight, because maybe you haven't seen them, so that's kind of how they are. And so I think it's important for us not to think about them as like how much face-to-face or not, because the truth is that in an in-person block, you're going to have more face-to-face time because you're literally in the presence of an adult for longer, right? Like that's just how the math there works. I think the interesting question is, and something for us to wrestle with, apart from the obvious question around safety, is from a quality perspective, is it better to have facilitated interspersed virtual learning or kind of long chunks of time with a highly qualified staff person supporting you, and then these long chunks of time that are more unsupported? And that to me feels like a better conversation for us to have. But I have a question for you, Lisa, which is I haven't seen anything in here around the staffing of this. So when we talk about A, B cohorts, is that like I'm a teacher Mrs. Cook and I have an A cohort and then a B cohort, so like I'm present 4 days a week, or is it like I'm A and I'm in and out and in and out? I just not clear on that.
Yeah, great question, Elizabeth. Thank you. And thanks for sharing about your experience with the current virtual learning 2.0, because I think that it is true that if you're just hearing the terminology synchronous and asynchronous, it's hard to really picture what
It's
that
really
means.
hard to get what it is
Yeah.
unless you've seen it, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's taken me several weeks to figure
Right.
out what it is.
It did help me to hear
new,
that. I feel
it's, you know, it's new jargon for everybody. So anyway, thank you. So yes, so a teacher, if you're Mrs. Cook and you're the teacher, your 20 kids that are in your first grade class would be divided up into cohort A and cohort B. So you would be, and that's assuming that they all choose to come back to hybrid. Some of your 20 students a few might choose to remain 100% virtual, and then they would have to go with a different teacher. So if you were in the hybrid and you were returning to school as a teacher, you would have your cohort A and cohort B. And so you would be in school the 4 days with your 2 different cohorts. And you would be teaching cohort A on Mondays and then cohort B on Tuesdays. And what you taught cohort A on Monday very well is exactly what you're teaching cohort B on Tuesday. And then the same with the Thursday, Friday.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I could just elaborate a little bit here, again, it seems that the at-home learning, there's lots of questions around that. So again, there would still be a morning meeting touch point that would be virtual but synchronous with, so again, Elizabeth, if I can keep using you as the teacher, if it's Monday and cohort B is at home, you would still meet with your cohort B in a virtual synchronous morning meeting. So you could still have some time to connect with the students and sort of see how they are ready to learn that day. Maybe review some of the links and where they're going to find some of their activities and get them set to learn. But then they would not experience you for the rest of the day synchronously, because you would be focused on your face-to-face students that were in the classroom with you. The students that are at home would be, again, doing some of the practice assignments, the application activities, maybe different projects they have going or other extensions. Much of that would derive right from what they have experienced in a previous face-to-face setting, and then just doing that work on the off days or at the at-home days more independently.
Elizabeth?
Just a question around feedback. So I think one of the things that I found most effective with the virtual learning that's been a happy surprise for me is the recorded feedback. So again, for my colleagues that don't experience this every day, you put the lesson in, your child does it, and then usually the classroom teacher, but every once in a while it's an EA or related arts, if it's a related arts, will put in a comment of some sort, a voice comment or whatever, providing feedback on, what you did, what they liked about it, what went well, or sent things back if they're not correct. So I understand not wanting to overburden staff with like kind of bouncing between virtual and those things, but can we talk a little bit about the expectation of that recorded feedback for the students who will be engaged in asynchronous instruction on their non-school days?
Sure. Again, some of this will evolve once we have faculty back in the building, but you heard me mention earlier about the importance of still guaranteeing some prep time during the face-to-face days. And that's why related arts remains, again, let me rephrase that. Related arts is important in its own right, but during related arts time, it does allow a homeroom teacher some time to address some emergent needs. And that may be that time when a teacher is offering some feedback or addressing some of the learning that's happening with the at-home cohort. I think I've
Uh,
reviewed most of these pieces. I think we have just one more
Wait,
slide.
Lisa, I gotta scroll around. I'm trying to see who has questions.
Oh, I do,
Lorraine,
Eric, I
I
do.
got
Okay.
Lorraine and then Eric.
So Lisa, many students have built connections with their current teacher. Going to this model from virtual to the hybrid, would they lose their teacher possibly?
They could possibly. And again, our final slide is some of those considerations that make this a really hard choice. I mean, none of this is easy. But yes, we would need to reshuffle some classrooms if students were choosing to be 100% virtual and other students are choosing to return in the hybrid. That would require some shuffling of students.
Eric?
So I'll follow up with Lorraine's question. Is there some sort of logistical reason or legal reason why we wouldn't be able to have a teacher that is doing in-person learning and have that recorded for the virtual learning?
Yes. So there are privacy issues in recording and sharing out when you have all students engaging in learning. And so what it is, what's okay to record that doesn't create a educational record for a student would be just the teacher. Perhaps you might be able to have a stray comment that a student makes, but you cannot identify the student. But if you are actually engaging in effective face-to-face teaching and learning, you're probably calling on students, you're asking their opinions, you're getting them to answer, you're giving them feedback, maybe even correcting some of their answers at times. All of that creates an educational record and some privacy issues that prevent us from recording that and then sharing that back out with others.
So I have a follow-up to that question. Are other districts that you know of using that model of recording, maybe be it just the teacher, and presenting that as a virtual piece for the students that want to do the virtual cohort?
I do think some districts are recording just the teacher, but we also have, I mean, similar to what our teachers are preparing now, they do have lessons prepared on a few slides that they push out in Seesaw for students. So that's what's happening during the asynchronous learning, virtual learning right now. And so in the hybrid model, teachers are either setting up students based on the face-to-face so that they know what some of the learning looks like the next day, and then potentially still providing some slides that help guide the student through the day.
Okay,
They're just not simultaneously teaching both cohorts.
I understand. Yeah, so then my last question then related to that is, I'm going to ask, and then I'm going to ask this to you or Dan. So do we need more teachers to have two options, whether it be a hybrid or in-person model and a virtual online model?
Well, currently, right now, we should be able to staff both models. I mean, the hybrid and the virtual, because there won't be an increase in students. They're the same number of students. They just may be shuffled into some different cohorts.
Currently, you're saying we can do that with the plan as presented.
Correct.
But if there was if it was something that was not as presented, it's likely we would probably need to hire more staff, especially if it was a 4-day a week or afternoon, morning type of in-person learning.
Right. I mean, it depending on what the model looked like, it could
Because it
require
seems
more
like
staff.
that staffing issue seems to be a big hurdle or a big issue. That's, why the you're presenting the cohort AB model to us. Is that fair to say that that was part of the reason that this model was presented, was because of staffing?
Well, we want to be able to use our current teachers with our current students, even if the hybrid and the virtual learning requires some shuffling. But with our current staff, we can continue to serve our current students.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, Eric, and to answer your question. The answer is yes. If you looked at a different model where students were to attend every day, not in smaller cohorts, now you're reducing the number of students that a teacher has. So instead of having 20 students, they would be with the same 10 students all day. And yes, that absolutely would require more staff that we don't have.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
I think I just have one final slide.
Lisa, can I just ask one more question, just so this is clear? So there will be one like third grade teacher who's going to teach the A and the B core cohort, as well as provide oversight in person, as well as provide the oversight to their virtual. And one of the reasons, and again, it makes sense to have that continuity of a teacher and instruction. But that also means for those cohorts that they really aren't going to have a teacher available except during that check-in period time in the morning for 2 of their 4 days. The virtual students have a teacher that is kind of there and available, even though they're doing asynchronized learning during certain times. There is kind of a teacher that is there for them all 4 days during the day.
Right, during the virtual learning 2.0, the students are receiving 4 days a week of a mix of synchronous and asynchronous instruction.
From one
But
teacher,
from,
right?
from their homeroom teacher, right?
Okay.
And so it's very facilitated, right? The homeroom teacher guides the students through their virtual learning 2.0 day. And again, that's why we are very pleased with the effectiveness of our virtual learning since we returned in the fall, because the synchronous pieces that we added, which was different than what we had in the spring, has brought a lot of increased sort of connection with students. The students, we have great attendance. Students want to see their classmates and their teacher. And they're able to then shift into the asynchronous learning with some frequent touch points during the day that again may amount to in total, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours of synchronous with their classmates, getting lessons, and then going off and learning and then coming back. So again, it's very facilitated. In the hybrid model, on the 3 days, the Wednesday and then whatever 2 other days, the students are not face-to-face. That is much less facilitated. They would still have that morning meeting. That would be a touch point to get them set. They would receive some sort of direction about, some of the ongoing tasks that they're responsible for. But right, they wouldn't have ready access to their teacher, because their teacher would be teaching face-to-face and giving his or her full attention to the students in front of them face-to-face. So some of the continued considerations that make these really difficult choices is as Laureen had mentioned, yes, the students may have to switch teachers and have new classmates due to the dual options of a hybrid and virtual learning 2.0. And so we would have to continue to work on our community building, expectations and norms, etc. Also, when you have teachers who are now, when you have dual options going, You will have some teachers who are focused solely on virtual learning 2.0 and others who are focused on the hybrid model. And that means that co-planning may be impacted by that separation. Face-to-face learning activities and pacing, as much as we would like to be able to keep those consistent across models, and we think we can keep them fairly consistent, we know that they're not identical experiences. There's nothing that would be an identical experience. That would be a challenge. Student movement while face-to-face. Students who think, and again, these are our youngest learners, so 4K through 2, some of our students haven't experienced school yet, but let's say it's a second grade student returning, and that second grade student has memory of what first grade was like or what kindergarten was like. Returning to the building will look very different for that second grade student because they won't be able to necessarily throw their arm around a classmate and walk down the hall together. They won't be able to play tag on the playground. Eating lunch will be something most likely in a classroom with their teacher, staying 6 feet away from their peers. So it really will be an effort for students and teachers to reshape that experience in the classroom to keep safety and health a priority for everyone involved. We know that, again, students and staff are struggling with how to adjust to life in this pandemic right now, and having to possibly transition back to virtual learning for everybody if there were an infection or an outbreak. That's a very real possibility, and we see that happening in district after district where they started back in some in-person learning and then had to pivot back to virtual. So we just need to acknowledge that it's a real possibility that there could be ongoing transitions back and forth. Unfortunately, we cannot say with a guarantee that returning 4K through 2 students in a hybrid model would be what would exist without having to pivot back. And then the very last bullet point here addresses just the decisions around who would remain virtual, who would return to school if you're a 4K through 2 teacher, and also the complicated or the increased complications for staff who have multiple classes that they see. So if I'm a homeroom teacher, I may just see my 20 kids in cohort A or cohort B, but related arts teachers see everybody's children. And related arts teachers are then exposed at a greater extent. And so that's an additional challenge to talk about what would instruction look like, because it probably will not look like it did with all those different students coming to a classroom to engage with their related arts teachers. Special education teachers, student services staff, and EA staff are all similarly impacted like related arts teachers. So I would conclude this section of the presentation just by saying these are very, very hard decisions to make. Nothing is perfect. None of these models are perfect, but we do feel that if we were to return 4K through 2 students to schools, that this AB hybrid model meets the greatest number of the factors we wanted it to address.
Just one quick clarifying question, Lisa or Dan. On the last bullet point, you said staffing decisions who remain virtual and who return to teach face-to-face could be complicated. So am I correct to assume that teachers would not have a choice of what they do, or is that going to be something that would try to be, how would the district do that?
Sure, I'll answer that. Without question, teacher preference would be considered, but we certainly would not be able to guarantee that every preference would be met. And so at the end of the day, teachers would have to be assigned to one or the other for the in-person or the virtual.
But you would first try to gauge if there's volunteers of who would want to do the virtual or the hybrid. Am I correct? Before we got-
Absolutely. No question. We would want to try to consider preferences as number one factor.
Okay, thank you, Dan.
Just another question, in terms of parents making the choice, I'm assuming they really would need to commit to a choice. And I just was listening to the same panel discussion that Susan mentioned earlier today. And in a later one in the afternoon, Kaleem Care was talking about his One City schools, where they have most their back in person, but they have some that are virtual also. And they've capped their in-person at 15. They're in a new building and they figured 15 they could space. No, they can't do any more. So they've really said that if you're in person and you decide you want to go virtual later in the year, that might be able to be accommodated. Even then, I think they're having them do it by trimester because you don't want people going in and out all the time. But if you're virtual, you cannot make the decision to come in person because they have to absolutely cap the number in the classroom. And so I'm assuming that's another thing to point out to families, is that they have to be very thoughtful about this and make a commitment, because we can't really have people going back and forth. I mean, the idea was you want to protect the cohort of kids who are there in person, and they go so far as to they're encouraging their kids and parents to be in specific pods out of school also, and really strongly encouraging them not to break those pods when they socialize and everything else, because as soon as you have them coming in, it alludes to the problem Lisa just mentioned with the related arts people who are already in contact with more people. And every time you do this, it just increases the capacity. I think it is inevitable that there'll be some closures. I mean, I've just experienced that with my own daughter. And the other thing is if you have a child in one grade level is ill and you have to quarantine that class for a period, if they have a sibling in another class, that's another. So it does become, I could see us having to go back and forth is what I'm saying. So I appreciate your explanation of why this is the model you landed on, and it does make sense to me, because I think we have to look at flexibility down the road. And okay, sorry for that rambling thought.
No, and thank you, Susan, for just pointing out about the class size and the need to have students commit to a longer period of time. I think we have talked about addressing this quarter by quarter, but at least a commitment for a quarter would be helpful. Trying to transition in smaller increments would be very challenging.
Well, I just want to point out that when we're making the decisions, that in educationally, instructionally, stability and lack of disruption is extremely important. And whatever we do, it has to be something that we can do consistently going forward. One of the things that prompted me to support starting virtually rather than something else is because the chances are we were seeing a lot of other school districts open and then close and have to go virtual, and that creates a disruption, which is probably sets them back weeks to go back and forth between models. So whatever we want to do, we want to make sure that it's something that we can very consistently implement and hang on to and keep operating going forward, because the cost of a disruption to the instruction is huge.
Let me look around, see if there's any more questions. Okay, I don't see any more questions. So thank you, Lisa, for all that information. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. All right, so the next slide, this is just a reminder and where this fits in to kind of recap, why are we even looking at a hybrid model? Clearly, you pointed out, and we talked about a number of the challenges with that. It's certainly, if you were looking at, what's the best way to instruct students, you want to start with this, model, but this is the challenge that we face, and the restrictions that we have to, and the parameters that we have to follow. So this hasn't changed since the beginning of the year. We introduced this in August, that we're starting in the upper left corner with the virtual learning for all. As we're monitoring, we're going to talk here next about the safety issues that would have come into play, the non-instructional issues. And our plan, again, is to, when we can return students, to start with this phased reopening. We all know that the end goal is at the end of this, to have a full return of all students. We know without question instructionally, it's not even close. That's the best model that we would like to have. But along the way, we have all these other parameters that we need to follow in order to get to that point. So again, I know that you know that, but I just, as a reminder about why we're even considering this phased approach, and because those are the directions we're under. Okay, so let's talk about some of the safety and risk mitigation protocols, so that when we do return students, how are we assured that we're doing everything possible to keep it as our students and staff as safe as possible. Okay. So again, back in July, Public Health Madison Dane County shared their K-12 school requirements for opening that dealt with these safety protocols. This is still in place. This order was not impacted by the Supreme Court injunction. So this is an order, and that's why you're seeing schools in Dane County operate differently, perhaps, than some of the schools outside of Dane County. And so the safety requirements are all in place. We have shared these before. There's links to all these documents and the handouts. So we won't go through them all in detail. We certainly can come back to any of them that you would like to talk about a little bit more in depth. But just as a reminder that part of that decision-making back in the summer to start virtual was that when we were given these requirements, we felt by the end of July, we weren't ready to meet those requirements, not all of them fully. We were concerned about the cleaning. We've talked about that already tonight, that now we've learned more about it, that it's not as a deciding factor as we thought it was early on in the summer. In the summer, we thought we might have to hire more custodial staff in order for cleaning and disinfecting. Now we feel confident, at least with a phased opening with a limited number of students, that the staff that we have is sufficient for that. Healthcare staff. Early on, there was a lot of discussion about monitoring for symptoms and even perhaps even checking, temperatures and so on. Some of that guidance has changed as well. And so we've talked a lot and looked at what our healthcare staff needs are. Again, we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, about how that fits into the safety protocols. Again, this is just a copy of some of the protocols that are in the requirements. I won't go through them all. We've talked about it many times. But again, as we talk, one key point that I guess I'd like to make sure the board really understands about what does it mean with the requirement of the 6 feet physical distancing between students and staff, and the requirements state to the greatest extent possible. And so I've shared before that we have had at least weekly meetings early on. There were 2 or 3 times a week with officials from public health to help talk through these issues and their guidance and the rationale for the requirements that have come out. And the most important thing to remember, with the greatest extent possible, they understand that if we're talking about K2 students, that they 100% of the day are not going to be physically distanced 6 feet from everyone. Our employees are able to do that right now when we're not in session. Okay, and I've given the example. I'm fortunate to have a very large office. My assistant Joyce and I have not come within 6 feet of each other since March. We can do that as employees. You can't do that in a classroom with K2 students. So the standard for greatest extent possible, really, it comes down to planned versus incidental close contact. So by planned, that means we have to have desks or wherever students are situated at a minimum of 6 feet apart. We can't say, well, we're going to put 15 in a classroom and go 5 feet because that's the best we can. Okay, planned means we have to make do the best we can to make those plans at 6 feet. Incidental close contact are things like a kindergarten teacher helps a student tie their shoe. they're in close contact for a very short period of time, okay, but it's not consistent and sustained. And so that's just a couple examples of the difference between planned and incidental. But our plans for reopening mean that we have to be planned physical distancing as you know, again, the greatest extent possible as we just defined. So I know I spent a lot of time on that, but that's really important because that is what is hindering us and making it very difficult to come up with these instructional plans on having, you know, the number of students in the buildings.
And so let's say first grade, kindergarten, what happens when, like, you know, a student needs help getting a coat on, or they drop their mask, or, you know, they need help going to the bathroom, all those like hand-to-hand things that teachers do on a daily basis. What's the plan for that?
Yeah, it's to minimize as much as possible, but the reality is in school with youngsters, you know, that age, those things need to occur. And so it's really to minimize, you know, like I said, to the greatest extent possible.
So then the protection measures for teachers, are you going to get to that?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, that's a really important question. Okay, so just some examples of some of the things. And again, I'm not going to go through every one of these because we could talk at length, and I'll be glad to talk about any of these specifically that you'd like to discuss in more detail. Again, you have this in the handouts, and these are all the things that we have gone through, and many of these things that we have in place. Some of these things we would finalize before reopening, but these are all important safety features and protocols, again, safety and risk mitigation. So things like physical barriers. We do already have plexiglass in all the school offices as one example of the physical barriers.
So Dan, you don't have plexiglass on the desks, on the student desks, right?
That is correct, because we are not going to, the districts that have done that when they are not able to put students 6 feet apart, where there are some districts outside of Dane County that still have full classrooms and students, you know, within 2 or 3 feet of each other. So then they're using plexiglass to separate the students. Now, there are some situations that we would have plexiglass available in the classrooms, and we can talk a little bit about that. You know, for example, if we do have a situation where we might have a specialist or even a classroom teacher, you know, that, but it's more when we're providing, you know, instruction in specialized areas where we might have to, you know, I'll give, you know, speech and language as an example, okay? It might be difficult to do that at 6 feet apart. And so that would be a situation then that if we're providing, you know, those direct services, that we might use plexiglass as well as have teachers available to have full PPE in that case.
Well, and have you considered at all for any of those classrooms, particularly as you look at physical barriers, having the face mask as well as the plastic shield?
Absolutely. So we'll talk about PPE here in a little bit,
Okay, good.
but all that.
And then would you also integrate somewhere, has is the governor's message of today on gatherings on 25%, is that having any effect on the plan?
Yeah, it does not. That schools are exempt from that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, again, I'm going to just give a few examples of each of these, but I'll be glad to go into more detail on the ones that I don't cover, you know, in depth. Okay, so physically distanced classroom. We've talked about it already. Here is an example of a classroom in Kaiser Grove School that's been set up with spacing with desks. And the one thing that hasn't happened in this classroom yet, we would be using adhesives on the floor, okay, to separate as well. And the reality is to have, you know, if you look at each student having their own physical space, in general, that might be about a 3 foot square area. And then the 6 feet in between. So it really turns into more like 9 feet between desks to really meet the standard of trying to maintain the 6 foot barriers or the distancing. So this is just an example of what a classroom would look like. Now, here's another example where it's been partially set up. So the example on the left shows a current classroom that has not been adjusted. Okay, this is the Taylor Prairie classroom, and this is what a first grade classroom, looks like, with desks clustered together, a number of shared materials and so on. And the one on the right has separated the desk. There's still some additional materials in there that, we really would be needing to move a number of items out of the classroom to create space, things that previously were shared. And so the goal is to not have students sharing materials or spaces at all. And so that's one of the challenges, but we would be able to accommodate, again, having to move furniture out of classrooms to create those physical spaces. Signage is a huge thing, okay? And so signage all over the place to, direct, students as far as, traffic in halls, signage for safety and so on. And here's an example of the type of sign you might see in a K-2 building for students to read. We have them all over the place for our staff that are much more clear and to the point. But here's an example of what it would look like as reminders, for our students. Things like drinking fountains, okay? We would need to, they cannot be available for community use. Now, temporarily, while we have staff in the building, we have, done things like this with taping up and so on. Before students return, we would actually do something more secure than that. There are items that can be purchased to lock over those mechanisms, and those would be in place before students so that they would not have the ability to use, shared drinking fountains.
So students would have to have their own water bottles then?
Correct. And again, all kinds of building-wide signage. There's not a picture of this, but the first one I think is really important that you've, I know are aware of, with ventilation. Okay, we know that as far as, with the opportunity for virus to spread through airborne, the one positive thing that I can report is with the recent upgrades to Winnequa School this past summer and the replacement of the HVAC system, that every one of our buildings do have the capacity to be able to adjust airflow to recommended levels in all of our buildings. We've already increased the airflow now just for the staff that have been returning, and we could increase it further when we have more students in the building as well. So that's a really important feature. And again, fortunately, we're able to do that now because of the recent upgrades through the facilities referendum.
So Dan, with the ventilation, I know that's a really important piece that the health professionals are talking about. When you say increase, what is the capacity of what can we do? Can we get to is there a certain level, that benchmark that they recommend, and can we reach that level?
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of the exact standard, but I have been told that whatever that recommended level is, that yes, we can reach it.
We have the capacity now.
We do, yeah. Okay. And if anyone would like the details on that, we can make sure we get those for you, but.
Yeah, I would if we have that, because that's an important one. The American Society of Architects and Environmental Health and Safety Engineers recommends 6 air changes per hour, which is an air change every 10 minutes in a room. In other words, that the air into the room equals the capacity of the size of the volume of the room every 10 minutes. As a minimum. So we would want to get there.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that too, Dan, if you can get
okay.
it.
What would actually be important to know is if there are any rooms or spaces which we can't meet that for whatever reason, where it varies, and that we can, and then we have ways to avoid those rooms. So it is important to, there's often not that much you can do to change it, but if we do know which rooms could be a problem, then we can do something about avoiding those rooms.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, and then again, just there's so many other things with day to day, and I'll talk a little bit more about on the the healthcare specifically, but things like, again, having hand sanitizers all over the place, sign-in sheets. This is what we currently have in place right now. For everyone who enters our building, we need to know who is in the building and when. For contact tracing, should we have exposure of any of our staff and students. And I'll talk about that in a little bit in the next slide as well, coming up. Transportation. And so, yes, we have been working directly with Nelson's on the plan for transportation. The same things apply. We need to reduce capacity on buses, have disinfecting and cleaning in between and so on. And so those plans as well have been developed. And one of the important things, and we'll talk about at the end here about what are the next steps, should we decide to reopen. A key piece, again, talk about surveying parents is knowing whether they will use transportation services. One thing that we have found from learning from other districts that have opened is that ridership is way down, which is really helpful because if every student who is eligible rode the bus, we would have to be running double or triple routes. But understanding, again, for parents to understand so they can make an informed decision about what it would look like on the bus. Many parents who do have the capacity to take their children and generally might do so. So I understand in some districts as low as 30% ridership from eligible, transportation. So another really important piece to the school openings. Student support, this goes without question, not only for opening, of course, but the social emotional support and again, our student services staff that is, part of their expertise in supporting all of our staff and students. But then the second piece, the health and nursing, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. That comes up in the next slide as well. But that is a really, really important piece. So you may recall as a district, we have 2 full-time school nurses. Lynn Hansen serves our schools in Cottage Grove and Kate Wittig our schools in Monona. We are very fortunate to have those 2 excellent professionals. They have gone through all they've been part of the meetings and trainings with public health and DHS, from the beginning, and they are integral in helping us with our safety planning, with health and services. I should also mention, our other assistants, Kim Cook and Courtney Miller as well, are a key part of those teams. And so we'll talk a little bit about what their role is, which is huge and essential, in any reopening plans. I'll come again up that in a slide or two. Athletics and activities. We're going to talk a little bit more about this at our next regular board meeting on October 14th. But just as a reminder, there is, again, sports guidance and actually a requirement from public health that is, again, still in place that is not affected by the Supreme Court injunction. And at this time in Dane County, public health has ordered that schools may not have competitions for what is defined as medium or high risk sports. And so at this point, our fall season, the WIA has offered an alternative for the fall season to compete in the spring alternative season. So at this point, that is still the plan. The winter season is coming up soon. Unless something changes in the order from public health, we will not have a winter season. At this point, it is prohibited to have competition, but we're in conversations and we'll know more later whether there's any remote possibility of that changing. But like I said, we'll talk about that specifically at our next board meeting. But that's another really important piece. Okay, and now the incident response plans. Okay, this is something that we've been working on since summer. Understanding that in July we had to have plans in place for our employees. Okay, under order. And so as far as how the requirements for our employees with physical distancing, masking, and then likewise with how we deal with any staff who may have a positive case or be in a close contact. And so those have been in place from the get-go. And then we made some adjustments as our teachers returned in August. Okay, all teachers had to be trained and acknowledge receipt of all the protocols as well. So those have been in place. And then, as you know, we have returned some students with IEPs to the buildings. And so that's extended now as well for the procedures and protocols for students. And so again, the last point there, number 4, there are some hyperlinks there to some documents from public health. Both public health, Dane County, as well as DHS at the state level have been excellent partners with school districts in providing guidance for us, as well as templates and action plans to walk us through, the reporting requirements as well as notifications. Again, both of our school nurses have gone through the training as contact tracers. And so they would take the lead in facilitating that along with our building principals should we have any positive tests. And so again, without going through the entire procedure, the real short of it is that if of course, there's a mandatory quarantine should any of our employees or students have a positive test. And then anyone in the buildings who may have come in close contact with anyone who has had a positive test must also be quarantined. And so part of the procedures are, how do we determine a close contact? And the close contact is an actual defined term that's actually, not only locally, but through the CDC within 6 feet, less than 6 feet distancing for a cumulative of 15 minutes or more. And one of the questions is, well, what if we have in a classroom? Okay, is every student in that classroom a close contact? And in kindergarten through 2nd grade, the likely answer is yes. We talked about the incidental close contact. The reality, to be able to confirm that someone has not come within 6 feet of another individual all day long or whatever time they're in that classroom, would be difficult. We would have to be absolute certain if we determined that, but that's what our nurses have been trained to determine and be able to work through with our staff to again, make those determinations. So that's just a really short explanation. And again, I'm not an expert on all of that, but I've been, through this enough that I have a pretty good idea of the overall plan. Our nurses are experts, and public health is on call to walk us through any of those as well. So I'll take questions on that. Okay.
Eric and then Susan Manning.
Thank you, Andrew. Dan, I have 2 questions. The first one is there going to be testing available for teachers and staff in the schools?
Okay, that's a great question. In fact, we just got notification this afternoon. By testing, you mean actually performing the tests in the schools? Yeah,
if a staff comes in and they leave at the end of the day, are they available, or before they start their shift, are they available to get a test?
Okay, currently the answer is no. Okay, and so we just actually got guidance this afternoon from DPI and the school nursing regarding that. I'm actually looking at the email right now, and actually at the federal level, there's been some talk about making that available at the state level, and they wanted to reiterate that there are a number of things that have to be put in place before that would happen, and whether schools would be on the list first for allocation or other facilities. So, at this point, the answer is a firm no, that's not available at this time.
Well, I hope if we can have our college football teams get daily testing, we can figure out a way to have our students in public education get testing. So I'm going to count on our state leaders and to make that happen, because that's a necessary thing that has to happen as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and that absolutely would go through the state level with DHS.
Yeah. I know.
Okay.
My next question is, if we have a teacher who has a cough, a cold, a runny nose, or a student, they're not going to be able to come in, and it's not like it was before. We're going to have to be more cautious about coming to school. Most likely they'll have to get a test before they come in. That's what we want. We want to be safe. So what is the plan for sick leave for teachers if they can't come in those situations? And for students, are we going to do anything like temperature checks or anything like that?
Yeah. So our nurses have been trained, and there have been standards given with regard to symptoms, and the nurses would be the ones to make the call whether or not the student exhibited certain symptoms where we would exclude them and send them home or require them to stay home, and they would have the authority to make that call. With regard to staff, likewise, we certainly want them to self-report and self, make those decisions if they experience symptoms. If we're aware of that, of course, we would, ask them, and we have the authority to exclude them as well. As far as leave policies, that's a long answer, but there are not, it depends on the situation, but there are at times employees might be eligible for their federal leave under certain circumstances. We also have, of course, employee sick leave available. So it kind of depends on the circumstance, but those have been in place already, again, for all of our employees, particularly our year-round employees, since this summer. And that's something that Nicole and HR has a good grasp on what the different options are available.
And that's part of the CARES Act for the COVID sick leave?
Yeah, I honestly don't know if it's specifically part of the CARES Act, but yeah, it is a federal leave available. So I think
there would be a district contact person to help teachers out with that.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
I've got a question.
Wait, Peter, Susan Manning first, then.
Okay.
Thank you, Andrew. Dan, would you walk us through the plan for the report of a positive test? So I've got A or B cohort, and there's a report from the Department of Public Health that one of the students in the second grade of the A or B cohort in one of the sections has a positive test. So I want to know very clearly to go in there and assess which of the kids in that section may have had contact, or the teacher that may have had contact, doesn't seem to make much sense to me from a healthcare point of view, and understanding what you would have to do that. And by that time, you could have 2 more positive tests. So I think it would be one of the clear questions from the parent group was, if you have a positive test in a section that is in the hybrid, how do you respond?
Yeah. So in item 4, the action plan, there is a hyperlink to go through the exact answer to that. But what I can say is our nurses have been trained to make that assessment. As I mentioned, I think it's highly likely that an entire class would be quarantined, but they would make that determination.
That seems I'm seriously concerned about that, because it means that the nurse has to be pulled into that classroom and make an assessment in relation to almost every student and the teacher, rather than you've had a positive test. So generally what the other school districts are doing, and I'm sure you had, you probably want to, I know you're talking to other superintendents, is so they get the positive test on Wednesday. They close the classroom down, and everybody in the classroom is quarantined. Now, understanding that you might have other people involved because of other teachers that may come into the room, I can understand at that point you might be looking, what day did they come in? How long is it? When was the positive test result? I mean, that kind of thing, that analysis. But I don't understand why we don't have a clear approach to quarantine upon a positive test in a classroom.
We have a crystal clear approach. If you read the action plan, it's very clear about the assessment of.
And did I get the action plan for tonight's meeting?
Yes.
And that's in the booklet that you gave us?
It's linked in the written report as well as the slides.
Okay, I see it. It's under 4A. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Peter?
In terms of safety and risk mitigation, my question would be, what are we doing to, before we open, or, what are we doing to plan before we implement any sort of hybrid or in-person model to prepare the kids to deal with the new model, the new reality that would be going on in schools? I have seen other schools, and it's been suggested that we do things like have teachers, when you're doing teaching online, encourage the students to practice wearing masks and so on. Are we implementing plans in our instruction to prepare students for what would happen if they start going back to school?
Yeah, great question. I would say those plans have not been fully developed yet, but I'm confident that that would be part of the transition that we'd work with our teachers on. Again, back to our nurses, and I can't speak enough about them, but they also will be providing training for our staff as well with those protocols with regard to their students, and that makes perfect sense to me that we would do something like that, but that has not been fully developed at this point.
Okay. Well, I encourage us to make a plan for doing that so that we can ease the transition.
Sure.
Lorraine?
Dan, do we have any protocols in place for our special needs students that may have difficulty with following the procedures?
Yeah, absolutely. So those, any individual student with specific needs, particularly students with IEPs, that would be actually part of their IEP plan. And so those protocols already are being put in place for the students that are, attending in person. But absolutely, those would be, they would be, yes.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Dan.
Okay. All right, so then the next part is, okay, what is happening with the community spread and how does that impact decision-making for our school district with reopening? So let's talk about school metrics. Again, you've seen these before, Public Health Madison Dane County. They originally came out with their metrics as part of their order on August 21st. And you might recall that that was very late, particularly for private schools who were planning on opening in Dane County beyond grades K2 that had to adjust plans at the last minute. And without going into a great amount of detail, but I think it is worthy just to kind of put this in perspective, we were told as early as the end of July from Public Health that they were developing metrics to determine when schools could safely reopen. But we were also told that DHS, Department of Health Services, at the state level, were also developing metrics for statewide. And so in Dane County with Public Health, they decided they were going to wait until DHS released theirs first to make sure that they could crosswalk and compare their metrics with the state level. And so they withheld releasing them, waiting for DHS. And we waited and waited. And then finally, in the middle of August, DHS decided, no, we're not going to release metrics statewide. And so that's what the delay was, right or wrong, but that's the rationale why they didn't come out so late. Now, as far as how does that impact us? Well, when we were kind of uncertain in the summer about what kind of restrictions might be in place with regard to were we even allowed to open at all, Public Health made it very clear that they will have metrics and determine whether or not schools could reopen. And so that was part of the decision making why you saw, virtually every Dane County public school decide to start virtually because of the uncertainty. And it was very clear that we should have an online, entirely virtual plan in place. So we were all surprised when the actual metrics came out that they broke it up by grade bands as they did. They have a rationale for that in the document with the metrics that explains it, and it makes sense, but we didn't know it was coming that way, okay? Nonetheless, that's what we had to work with. And as you know, at the time it was released as an order, and that is the part that currently is, there has been an injunction, that's the Supreme Court injunction, that order about the reopening of schools, okay? So at this point, that is turned into recommendations versus an order. So they did recently update their document on metrics and change the terms from order to recommendations. All right, so
I would note that the Supreme Court decisions is simply based on who has the authority to issues these orders. They have no basis. They're not based at all on the merits of the recommendations. And so I would urge us to follow the recommendations, the science of the recommendations, and the injunctions to me make no difference.
Yep, that is entirely correct. So thank you for stating that. So we'll talk about this in a little more detail shortly, but the target was met for K2 on August 18th of the target of sustained for 4 weeks of 54 or less cases on average. All right, so we have our, oh, I'm sorry.
Susan?
Dan, I just wanted to add, just for the community that had this question, and I appreciate that you directed me to this information because it was a Dane County directive rather than written by our district, and that you're using that. But it says, basically, if you find that there has been exposure in a classroom, then effectively, if the school staff cannot identify close contacts in a classroom or on school transportation, the entire classroom or school bus will be required to quarantine for 14 days. So I think that was the question. And that's kind of what you wanted me to see. So, good. Thank you.
Thank you for reading that. That does explain it more clearly than I stated. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'm sorry I didn't read that one resource. Sorry.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the Dane County metrics, but that's the background about where they came from and when. All right, another set of metrics that we've looked at are at the federal level from the Center for Disease Control that has also developed indicators and thresholds for risk of reopening school. And so I'd like to point out just a couple things. They have their core indicators and they have some secondary ones, but they are fairly consistent, even though they're with the public health metrics, in that the first one does talk about numbers of new cases per 100,000 persons and within the last 14 days. So again, the Dane County public health metrics were based very much upon the CDC as well as a number of other sources that are all cited in their document. And so to point out, where we're at right now, we're going to talk about the current data. But we are at 139 on the latest report in Dane County. And you see that puts us at the higher risk of transmission in schools. In the second indicator of the positivity rates, the last rate reported in Dane County was 3.7%. So that's at the lower risk of transmission in schools. And then the third indicators with regard to key mitigation strategies. We talked about mitigation strategies earlier. I would want to emphasize that those 5 key strategies we absolutely will have in place should we reopen. So that does put us at the low risk of transmission if we're able to do those 5 things. And those are consistent with the recommendations, again, at the county level. So those are really important, I think, to keep in mind as well when we look at decision-making on reopening. Okay, so
if I may, I would say that there's another factor that we should consider, which is, we talked about the risk. You also talk about the benefits, and we need to balance the risks and the benefits. One thing I would say, for example, if virtual 2.0 is going great for absolutely everybody, there is no reason for us to reopen until the risk is close to 0 as possible. So there's another driver that's pushing this. And if, however, we feel that there's serious problems with virtual 2.0, particularly for some cohorts, then that may drive us to say, when we reach these sort of the thresholds, the threshold's a minimum, well, that's the time to reopen. So part of this equation for me is, how are we doing with the virtual instruction? Is everything, how well is it going? If it's going great, then I'm not so worried about these, because we can wait. If there's problems, particularly, and the 4K2 cohort may be one of them, if we agree that there's a significant improvement, a significant deficit right now that we could improve, then maybe we should look at more closely at these risks and these risk metrics. And so I think one of the things to consider is, how the heck are we doing?
Yeah. I appreciate that, Peter, and I agree. And I think we'll talk about that when we get to the end here in the discussion point on decision making. That is something that we've talked about internally when we were looking at, all the different various hybrid models. And that absolutely was part of the conversation of, the added instructional benefit, for students of any of the various models. I'll make a general statement now, but if we want to talk more specifically, I'd like to defer a little bit more to Lisa and our principals. We'll be glad to talk a little bit to answer that question about how we're doing. But I am confident in saying that virtual education is working very well for many students, but there's no question it's not working well for some. And I know that's a really broad statement and maybe not a surprise. And so the question is about that degree, of how many students. And we also know that we're in our normal 100% face-to-face, that statement can be made. The question is, again, the degree and how many students are struggling in certain situations. So no doubt about it, we're not here to say 100% of our students are thriving in virtual. That would not be accurate. But
I know that's not true, but I'm just saying that that's part of the value judgment that we have to make.
I agreed. So, okay. All right. So let's look at some of the actual data. Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I just, particularly with the special needs students, so are we right now evaluating all of our special needs students and providing for return to the buildings for?
Right. So thanks for bringing it up. So as a reminder, that again, at this point, it's turned into a recommendation versus a requirement, but we are allowed to have students with IEPs and in person at any grade level. And so that decision is made by the IEP team on an individual basis for every individual student. And so we do have that ability to have students in the building should the IEP team make that decision.
So, and Dan, what if there's a student that doesn't have an IEP, but clearly is manifesting significant identifiable mental health symptoms related to the virtual learning process? Do they have a process for coming in and working with student services? Is there some kind of application process?
That is currently not allowed per the public health, what is now recommendations, and thus far we've been following those guidelines. So no, that is not allowed for in person. There are supports in place for students, but not in person in the buildings.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I believe it's true that the IEP cannot take into account, for example, that a student is not, whether or not a student has an IEP, we can't consider whether they're doing well or they're learning or struggling with the virtual model, or can we?
Well, again, the IEP team would determine what supports are needed in order to meet the IEP goals. Right,
but could a student who might otherwise not have an IEP have an IEP because because of whatever's going on with them, the virtual learning doesn't meet their needs?
So Peter, you're asking two different questions, I think. So one is for students who are currently being serviced under an IEP, what is the placement determination, right? And that's IEP team decision. But the second question is, what if I'm a student who's struggling virtually and that's how my disability is manifesting because of the virtual context? And is that an eligible consideration?
That's the question I want to know is that can we consider how they're doing with virtual learning in determining whether or not they have an IEP?
I got you, Peter.
Thank you.
Would you like to chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are definitely looking at how students are progressing in the virtual setting and how they are achieving. And so we are allowed to do evaluations for disabilities. One of the tricky components with this is that the requirements for identifying a disability are very regulated. And so for a student, for example, who might have an emotional behavior disorder, they have to show that it is frequent and consistent. And there's one other component, but it's across all settings. So it's in school and it's in the home. And so right now, one of the challenges that we're experiencing is this, for example, is this in the home? Is this in the school? or is it something different? And that's just, it's a very challenging judgment to make, because as much as we want to make sure that we are helping every student as much as we can be, we also want to be very careful that we are not over-identifying students unnecessarily either. So to answer your question, Peter, yes, but like every student with a disability, it's on an individual basis and based upon what evaluative measures we can do virtually and in a limited fashion in person.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's look at some of the data. Public Health Madison-Dade County does come out with a data snapshot weekly that has a lot of information. Again, there's a hyperlink to that document. One of the things that's been a part of the discussion the last several weeks, of course, or the last month, is the impact of UW-Madison and how does that impact our K-12 schools. And so that is something that's being tracked very carefully as well by Public Health. And the term that is used is spillover, from UW to the community. And so without going into a lot of detail, I put some of the highlights on some of the data. One of the things, again, that's in one of the slides to show how those cases correspond. This slide is one that we put together just based upon the actual average cases per 14 days. We know that the Dane County metrics are based upon the numbers, for the different grade bands on those 14-day averages. And so they share that out in an Excel sheet, just put it into a short little chart here just to show what has happened over time. And the red line represents the threshold or the target for K2 of 54 cases. So again, this shows the target was met back on August 18th, went above again on September 3rd and reached a peak on September 18th of 191. Again, every one of these charts just in itself, the deciding factor, but I just wanted to give you just a little bit of a flavor of some of the data that you might want to consider in our decision making. The next graph again came from Public Health, where they separated out the number of cases for non-UW students over time. Now, I want to point out that this data is 2 weeks old, this chart, but they were showing a tendency or an increase over that time of non-UW cases, where the bars are actually overall cases at that time point. Next chart comes from actually the state level, from DHS, that tracks or is tracking our data by youth age group. Again, a lot of discussion about our younger students and potential transmission and so on, and actual cases. So again, here's some data to look at as far as cases by those various age groups. Next chart, again, just looks again by age group, looking at percent of confirmed cases. Okay, so again, back to the decision making about whether or not to reopen or when to reopen for our case 2 students. Again, this is the same slide you saw earlier that it talked about the metrics that were placed by Public Health. And one of the things, well, again, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think we've talked about that, quite a bit already. All right, so the next slide gets into this idea of, okay, the benchmark was met back in August. Now the cases are above the target again. What does that mean? And why hasn't Public Health recommended or ordered schools to be closed again? And this is a question we ask virtually every week in our school conference calls with Public Health about, help us understand, when would you recommend closing again? And so this is quoted exactly from the call notes from Public Health. Now, keep in mind that since the lawsuit, all their comments are being reviewed by legal counsel before they're, published for us, understandably. So, their responses have been a little more circumspect, lately. And basically the answer again that we read is that I think they understand, and this is my interpretation, they understand that to have a definitive benchmark and have schools constantly open then close is something that's not feasible or good practice. And so I think in determining their benchmarks and closures, they are trying to look at the impact on actual individual schools. But nonetheless, this is the response to the first question about their rationale and what they're looking at and making those determinations. And then the second question is a follow-up to that. Will they be offering new guidance for us if these numbers continue to be high? And again, not a definitive answer. But I thought it was worth sharing that we asked a question every week, and these are the answers that we're getting. So it's difficult to say, what is that recommendation, and the fact that we haven't reopened yet. What does that mean, for us about, that 54-person threshold? And that's what we're going to discuss tonight, and what your thoughts and comfort level are with those numbers.
And Dan, if I might, to me, what jumped out on this slide is that last sentence, where it just says that they're not seeing concerning outbreaks in school environments. So for K2, because I think that's an important consideration, because I know I had asked you about this too. How can we be looking at this with the numbers going up? So I had marked that statement as, while they're not giving a specific recommendation, they're kind of drawing a difference between closing and, they're getting at the point you just made. So
yeah. Okay, thank you for that comment, Susan. And so I guess I want to be clear with the data that I shared tonight. I was just trying to give just an overall picture of some of the data that's being shared. Besides the fact that I have an opportunity to talk to public health officials on a regular basis, I'm not any more expert than anyone else here in the room. And so, that's, we do have, I will say, we as a district and myself personally certainly rely on the experts that give us the data, and where public health gets the information from. But that's, again, something that we're going to discuss tonight in our decision-making process.
Susan Manning? You're on mute, Susan.
You probably like having me on the mute. Dan, are we getting any kind of specific public health guidance about generally what you have people like Dr. Mackey and the CDC saying is that the transmission between children at younger ages appears to be, there's less, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't still expose the teacher. Do you have any resources on that? Is that affecting how you?
So my understanding is that has been a factor with the public health recommendations. Early on in the summer, when some of that was first coming out, that was the question about, might you, allow for the younger grades first. And so as much as, research is what it is as far as, what is definitive or not, public health has based their recommendations, I think, partially on some of the current research. As far as other experts, by no means can I speak on behalf of any consensus. I will say that I have read or heard from at least 2 different epidemiologists associated with UW that have stated that I don't use the word necessarily support, but that the plan of having increments by grade level makes sense, and that the earliest grades first. And again, those are my words, not theirs. But so that's kind of that's some of the other additional feedback we received.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, why don't I jump right to the next steps, and then we can get into discussion. Okay, so you've seen in the written recommendation that you know, I am recommending that we continue to follow recommendations of public health. And with that, then that really provides two options for our 4K2. Now, the guidance from public health, you know, uses the terms K2, but our 4K are in the buildings, and the same standards apply for 4K as 5K in our schools. So one option, of course, is continue what we're doing with the consideration of the data of, you know, to be determined about when might we be comfortable returning, or the consideration is to bring back in a phased approach beginning with the second quarter. And so those are the two options to discuss tonight. The recommendation is for 312 that we continue to follow the guidance and continue, you know, virtual only. Again, per the public health guidance. So that's all the data and information, you know, that we have on all the different aspects. And I think it, you know, to me, now would be the appropriate time for board discussion regarding those various options. I did not put a recommended motion for the board tonight. I didn't want to, I didn't think it was appropriate for me to interject a particular wording. I think there's a number of things that you can do based upon these options. You could explicitly use, you know, either one or some combination, you know, thereof, whatever you're comfortable with.
My first question would be, what are the timing requirements that you would need? Say, for example, you have a proposal that we allow choice starting November 9th. What's the timing for a board decision?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. So all along, as you know, back in July, the plan that was approved at that time was to do virtual for first quarter and reassess for the beginning of the second quarter. And that has to do with the timing of tonight's meeting. If you make a decision tonight to return students beginning the second quarter, we will be prepared to do that in the next 4 weeks. If there's not a decision and the decision comes a week from now, it'll be a little bit tighter. We still would do preliminary work in preparing, or continue doing that work, I should say, in preparing. So I think at this point, it'd be preferable to have a decision tonight. If you made a decision a week from now at our next regular meeting, I think it's still conceivable that we could be prepared for that beginning of the second quarter, November 9th. Anytime beyond that, I think it pushes back. So I think in general, about a 4-week window to prepare is what we're looking at, especially since at this point, as was brought up earlier, the most important survey question immediately is, you know, for parents to have a choice. And we think it's really important for them to make that choice, that they fully understand the options and what their child's experience would be. But I do think that that would be an option to, if the board's considering this, to start that immediately, you know, to get that new updated data on the parents.
Well, and Dan, could you explain about the choice piece? Because I know one of the things that's been very difficult for the schools that have closed down and reopened, many of the parents pulled all of their children out of the school, because if one's going to test positive, the other two probably will too, and they're trying to protect the other children. So if they have a choice, what's their ability to change that? And there may not be one.
Yeah, so I think Lisa addressed that a little bit earlier. We absolutely would ask for a commitment just because of staffing, you know, and being able to maintain, you know, class sizes and teacher, you know, class lists. So, you know, certainly there, I guess I'll say this to be honest. I mean, there always could be individual exceptions depending on cases, but in general, we would need to put in some parameters for, you know, timelines and a commitment. We haven't determined that yet. I think a good start would be probably by quarter, you know, to give a little bit of flexibility for, you know, to make changes.
Yeah, well, it seems to me it would be similar to when a child has an illness on regular school days, and then they're just absent and they have to get the work. And so it would be a bit more of a challenge if they had chosen the in-person given these circumstances, but I would assume that's kind of how that would have to work.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that brings up, well, it could bring up the substitute issue too, which is another problem. I mean, it's possible that if we had an in-person teacher, Well, if the teacher was out there, they'd have to quarantine the whole class anyway, probably. So I don't know how the sub factor and the fact that we hardly have any subs, I'm not sure we can get any if we need them, but just another issue. But well, I guess we should deal with this first. I think my other question is, I'm assuming that if we're going to support these targets, that then the 3 through 12, I think it's also what I hear parents asking for is just communication about the whole plan. So if we decide to do this for the second quarter, does that preclude any 3 through 5 for the entire quarter if we hit that threshold at some point? Or could we consider that before the end of the quarter? Is it likely that nobody else will come back until second semester? This is a quarter where there are a lot of holidays. That can be another exacerbating factor in the sense that there will be families getting together. There's more exposure, it raises risks. So I don't know. I guess I'm looking ahead to the 312 too, in terms of what we could communicate with families. Because I think when the survey goes out, it would be helpful to use that as also an opportunity to communicate. Well, the survey would only go to the 4K2, but I think communication should go out to all of our parents about, okay, here's what we're offering for 4K2. Here's where we are with 312, which is, these are the benchmarks and we aren't there yet, clearly, by a long shot. So,
Peter?
I guess there's a couple of components here. First is the risk, which we have, and the recommendations on that. And we have apparently the go ahead to go from the public health authorities to go ahead with 4K2. Second question, is there a need? Do we see that we have a need? Do we believe that we have a need to improve, to change how we're serving our students by going to the choice option? And the third thing is and we can answer that question. The third thing is there a demand? And before I could make a decision, I think we would really have to reach out to the teachers and get not the teachers, but the parents, and get a survey of who would be interested in what. Because right now, if I'm looking at my emails, they're running strongly against any reopening at this time, even in the 4K too. But I do not understand that that's not a representative sample. And other people may be seeing different things, different experience. So we need to get a survey out, and we need to get it, I think, with high participation, so that we can have a good judgment about that it's a really good reflection of what the parents think. And I'm hoping that we could do something like that within a week, and then we would be in a better place to make a decision.
Okay, Elizabeth, Eric, then Susan Manning, then Lorraine.
Yeah, so I think regardless of what option we choose, or even if that option is to sort of punt it to next week, I think we cannot leave here without some kind of family and community engagement, like plan or scope set forward. I feel like if anyone's been paying attention to the community since this started, but particularly over the last couple of weeks, it's really apparent that there's frustration, there's a lot of thoughts and feelings, all very justified. And I think we have a responsibility and an accountability to ensure that we're providing like really clear and consistent communication in general, right? So whether we stay virtual, having a plan for what does that communication look like for folks, right? Or whether we go hybrid, we need a plan there too. So I think, to me, like that just feels like a thing that needs to happen. I want to go back to Peter's question though from a while ago. And Lisa, I don't know if you're still there, but if you are, I'd be happy to chat with you again for a minute. Thank you. Hi. Around this idea of like why, right? So other than like what seems to me the self-evident why, which is like we want kids back in school because that's the thing with which kids do during the school year, right, is attend school and be there and be present. But knowing that that's not our current reality, right? It's not going to look like it looked last year pre-pandemic. But like, what is the compelling reason why we want to move this way? And for me, the reason we'd want to move this way in terms of hybrid is because, kind of to Peter's point earlier, the benefit of having 2 days of full in-person instruction outweighs the risk, right? The safety risks of contracting COVID. And so to Peter's question, how is virtual 2.0 going? Knowing, of course, it's not perfect for everybody, but kind of what are our successes? What's going well? What's our continuous improvement around it so that we can see whether or not the risk of bringing kids back in person and exposing the community to COVID is sort of worth it, if that makes sense.
Sure, I'll try to offer some thoughts, and if anyone else, a principal or someone wants to share a thought, that would be helpful too. So believe it or not, today was just day 19 of instruction with students in virtual learning 2.0. So of course I'm taking out the Wednesdays, which are planning days, but the actual facilitated learning between teachers and students was synchronous and asynchronous. Today was day 19. And I think that every week we have gotten better at it. All of our attention and focus is on one option right now, which is the virtual learning 2.0. And our teachers have done such a great job building community with their kiddos. We have really high attendance. And that's at all levels. So even at the high school level, students are attending their synchronous sessions. Some students just will not miss morning meeting, so you have some of our youngest learners who are just so excited to have morning meeting, and they might not join the rest of the day synchronously, but they're there for morning meeting. So it just speaks to like the connections and how important that is. And so when you ask the question, Elizabeth, about like what might hybrid offer that that the virtual learning 2.0 does not, some students may be seeing that the face-to-face in the building offers just more socialization or connectivity in a way, just being in the same space, even 6 feet apart, that is otherwise not being felt. So although they're seeing their peers on the screen, maybe the isolation is still such that I might prioritize that as a parent. I might prioritize a hybrid model for my child because that's something I'm not seeing in any other way. On the other side, we may have some families whose children are maybe attending daycare or interacting with a small circle of neighborhood families. And so they're getting some interaction and socialization. And for that family, the prioritization might be, I want 4 days a week of that synchronous, asynchronous blend, and I'm going to prioritize that choice. So it's really difficult to pit those two, and rate them against each other, because I just think every family has a slightly different circumstance, and the things that rise to the top of like why they might make a certain decision could be slightly different. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that's a really useful and helpful point, Lisa. And I think that that's a really fair comment too around sort of how I choose personally to prioritize and weigh against. Just a quick follow up, and maybe the principals that are on can answer this. So you talked about attendance, but last board meeting we separated like attendance versus engagement. And I'm just kind of curious, maybe from the building principal's perspective, around engagement in learning activities and sort of quality within learning activities as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in and speak to that. I think, we are closely monitoring not only just attendance, but also how many seesaw activities are completed by students. Teachers are really monitoring not only how often are they jumping on morning meeting, but their engagement and participation in small groups in those synchronous learning opportunities. And then really taking that team approach for those students who we maybe are struggling with the engagement piece, to do problem solving as a team involving the families for those students. And I guess I have been and would agree with Lisa that we are still seeing high levels of not only attendance, but also high levels of engagement, particularly, I mean, with all of our students, but K through 2 also.
I think that this.
Wait, no, Eric is
Sorry.
next. Eric's next.
I'm going to try to get everything in here so that we can move along quickly. So first, I just want to make a general statement about this plan. And as it sits right now, I don't think I would be able to support this plan for a couple of reasons. And then I have a question after why I give my reasons. The first one, on the safety side, I need to see more about what's going to happen with potential closures of schools. And I really want to see more about precautions and testing for our students and especially our teachers and staff. And then I have a problem with the disruption of learning for the virtual online that's happening right now. And it sounds like that is inevitable. And I can't support any, or I won't support anything if there's going to be a disruption. From a logistical and equity standpoint, if we're going to move to in-person online learning, I would like to see a plan for 4-day in-person learning. Now, I know that is going to require some, maybe potentially, it sounds like some additional staff. So I'm wondering if we can get maybe some information about what that would look like with additional staff required if we did go to 4-day in-person learning. Because I do not think that the plan as presented, and I appreciate all the work that went into it, and I understand that this is, you know, a lot of effort that a lot of people put into with Lisa and Dan and the principals and the staff. So I really appreciate that. But I don't think the face-to-face teacher time students get in the hybrid model, I think it's gonna be significantly less for the AB students compared to the online students. So that is a concern of mine. And then, so taking that into account, I would say if we do decide to do a survey, and I think we should, I would like to see in that survey one of the options for 4-day in-person learning to gauge and see what the interest level is in that, as well as potentially a hybrid model and the online learning. I think that will give us a lot more information that we need, because my guess is if people want to go back, they're probably going to want the 4-day in-person learning over the hybrid. And I understand that the hybrid, there's a lot of logistical issues, but I would like to see what they are, especially with the staffing concerns and teachers, because that sounds like that's the big hurdle there. And also, is it possible that we could do some of the recording? What would that look like? What would we need to do that? Is there technology pieces that we would need to do that? I would like that information. So as the plan is right now, I don't think it's something I could support. Those are the reasons why. And I do think a survey is important. So thank you.
Okay, Lorraine.
I think it's important to get feedback from our teachers because they are the ones that are hands-on with the students. And we don't know how many teachers may have some pre-existing conditions. So I think it's important that we, know directly what they're wanting to do.
Susan Manning.
Well, thank you, Lorraine, because basically one of my questions continues to be is, I did listen in on the 4K teacher discussion about going back. But I'm wondering what our feedback is from our teachers right now about going back under this plan. Because again, this plan has some challenges, I would say, for the teaching staff. So if there's any feedback from the teachers, that would be great. And then I continue to have some concerns about the 2 days in person coupled. I mean, so people that want to go back, that sounds great. You have 2 days in person, but then you're sacrificing 2 virtual days with teachers and instead getting 2 days of virtual effectively with only a check-in in the morning. So I think that choice is extremely difficult because you're saying, okay, I'm going to take 2 days in person because that's what I really want. And to get that, I have to take 2 days of learning on my own virtually with a check-in in the morning, versus 4 days of virtual with teacher interaction. So I'm still very concerned about that. And again, I feel I need feedback from the teachers before I can make a final decision.
Peter?
I'm sorry, excuse me, Susan, can you just clarify specifically which feedback?
Current feedback about the hybrid plan. I mean,
Okay.
if you have it, I might have missed it. I didn't get that.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to, unfortunately, we got off, and I wanted to circle back to this engagement piece that we were talking about with Lisa and some of the principals. You mentioned some things that sound very positive, and I think that what would be really important and really useful to me and to all of us in the community would actually have some data on this engagement, on some engagement metrics. I don't want this to be a burden to anybody. I know that everybody's got an awful lot to do, but I think that there would be some significant importance to have a snapshot, like our third Friday count, of some of these engagement metrics, like how do the teachers, if you asked all the teachers today to write down what goes on today, how many students were engaged, how many students they feel they don't have engaged, or whatever you feel the appropriate metrics are. And I'm wondering if it would be possible to do something like that, get a snapshot and get a snapshot back to us by our October 14th meeting, just to get, because I hear a lot of anecdotal data, and I would just like to get a good feeling for some good engagement metrics just once, just a snapshot, so it's a minimal impact. And I want to know if that's possible, and I also want to know if other board members feel that that might be helpful and useful to them in making the decision processes.
Susan Fox.
I think first of all, we didn't get to hear from the other principals, which I kind of want to hear what they had to say about that as well. But, I think it might be where a survey would be helpful to see how many parents would be interested in this model, because I get the feeling there might be some who are, and maybe it would be a smaller number than we thought otherwise. Maybe it's a bigger number. I don't know. And then also how the teachers feel about it. There are trade-offs for sure. And as Lisa said, it's a hard choice, I think, to make. And it's one that, families may have different strong opinions about. I guess I can't imagine how we could, any way that we could offer 4 days in person, because you'd have to double the teaching staff pretty much. I mean, I just don't see how that's possible. And even in terms of space, we wouldn't have the classroom space, because you can only fit 10 to 12 in a classroom. And so you have to have, for what takes up currently one classroom, they would need 2. So as soon as we got to the point where we were bringing in, hopefully, some of the older kids, that you can't, then you no longer have that space available. So I just don't see that as a possibility.
We don't know how many people would want to choose that option yet. So it's hard to say that until we figure that out, to be fair. We don't know.
Well, true. I guess I do think that for most, this is just a guess, based on some of the input we've gotten, that if we offered a 4-day in person, I think that would be more popular with parents than this 2-day version. So I would guess if parents are leaning towards wanting in person, that would be a much more appealing thing, and we'd get more, and we couldn't do it. And I think there's a little bit of a risk in offering something that we can't do too. So I guess I'd want to think about that, but it does seem like we have to make a decision at least by next week. So if people are sort of feeling like they need more input, it sounds like maybe a survey for which option at this point parents would be likely to choose would be important between now and then. And then also, it'd be maybe helpful to know what teachers think. I mean, there are, there are some teachers with pre-existing conditions too, for whom going back in person would be a problem. And it would be nice if it worked out that the people who needed to be virtual, if the numbers would work out so that that worked. It might not. I don't know. Other districts have obviously dealt with this, and I'm not sure how they've done that, but it's sounding to me like it would be helpful for people to know if there are actually, what the numbers are of people who would choose this option.
Okay.
That's
Susan Manning, you're on mute.
I do want to really thank Dan and the administrative staff and all the principals in the work that they've done, because I think if you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics, you'll see how to reopen schools safely. And they've really followed the key plans, and that is, look at the prevalence of COVID-19 in your local community. So they're using metrics, they're using a scientific standard, and then they're looking at the age group that, based on pediatric studies, appears to do better and is less infected than other age groups. So if we're going to start and see if this works, this is a really good place to start. So I think, again, it says kids seem to be at lower risk for COVID, but that doesn't explain the exposure to the teachers. So I still would really like to hear input from the teachers who would be asked to be teaching.
The other thing is that they can exchange it and they can take it home and pass it on to the community, their families in the community, and the schools become this. The children are, small children especially, are at low risk, but they're still spreaders, and they can still spread it amongst themselves, and they can still spread it to families and other members of the community. That's the issue, particularly with small children.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the reasons, Peter, that I was asking specifically about how do we respond to a positive case, and to have the Dan County guideline was helpful, because again, what happened in this northern Milwaukee community was the parents, when they had a section that tested positive, they shut that section down immediately. But many of the parents pulled their other siblings out of the other classrooms. And what was interesting about that, so our grandchild was in a classroom that had a student with a positive COVID test, a second grade section. They shut that down immediately, quarantined all those kids and the teacher, and they put them on virtual. So that was very helpful. But the mother also pulled the 4th grader and the 5th grader at that time and brought them home for the same reasons we've talked about. They might get it and expose other people, or they might be getting it at school because of the exposure. So within 2 days, there was a 5th grader who also tested positive, and they shut that section down. Those are the only 2 cases that they've reported and they've had that I'm aware of. But again, how do we respond? And do we have a plan and a program for that response? Because it's very possible that could happen. And the exposure did not come from school. It came from out of school.
But we don't want to become the nexus of exposure.
All right. I haven't talked. I let everybody talk. And what first off, like Susan Manning said, hats off to the administration, the staff, and the teachers of putting in all of this tireless work to try to get education to these kids. That's first and foremost. And I applaud all of you for doing all that. Number 2, we have a community that is tearing each other apart. I want my kids in school. I want this. It's all I, and no one is doing we. I want to shout out to a couple of people out who created In the Grove, who did community work to help the school district in the effort to get these kids educated. And with all of the blasting that they have done on these Facebooks and sites and everything, it's very disturbing that we have a community of parents who are only looking out for themselves and not the whole picture. No one has been in any type of pandemic like this. No one. And what the work that we have done to put this together, to do the best we can, is phenomenal. And now, reading all of these emails that we have been getting recently from some of the same parents who sent this out back in August, majority has changed their mind to say, I want to keep mine in virtual, because like a newborn baby, a baby has to learn how to crawl before he can walk. That's what we've been doing since March. We started off born into this. We have been crawling. Now we're starting to walk. And if anyone in the community, anyone that's listening to me right now, if you cannot see the work that Monona Grove School District staff has been doing, and the volunteers, 7 of us, board members, we are volunteers who got voted to help guide this. If you don't see us working hard, I don't know what to say to you. But I am going to say this. As we respect you out there in the community, you need to respect us, because we're doing our damnedest to get these kids educated safely and professionally. I know what I'm going to vote on, and I'm ready to vote on it right now. I love everything that the board has put out there for more data, and we need to get that together too. But I think, and I'm going to say it out there, stay virtual for the second quarter, get all of this data so we can be ready for the second semester. Because eventually, I hope COVID will go down and we can get everybody back. We have to be patient. The community needs to learn how to be patient. I'm sorry, the board did not make these decisions based on because we don't want kids in school. We want our kids in school. I have 2 myself. But we need to follow what DHS states and do the best we can. And if we can't do that, there's always going to be that 80-20. There's going to be 20% of the community and parents out there that is not going to like what we do, even if it's right or wrong. And we're just going to have to face the music. But what is important is that we do our best, even in virtual, even if we go into a hybrid, we have to do our best. So with my vote, I'm ready to vote, and that's going to go all virtual for the second quarter. But I want to follow what my other board members stated in that time of that second quarter, to get that information and data from the teachers and from the community to bring out what we can do here in the future. I love the drawn out plan that Dan had presented to us, as Lisa Hype has presented. There's a plan there. We can still build on that plan during the course of the second quarter. But I cannot, I can't stand here. Sit here and just have the community trying to fight amongst each other and then attack us in this whirlwind. This is not fair to the kids. So out there in the community, I'm gonna let you know right now, I am a volunteer, voted on here. My seat comes up in April. If you think you could do a better job, don't talk the talk, walk the walk, and you run. Run against me. Take my seat, and you come up here and do the job that these other 6 board members have taken their time to try to come up with great decisions for the superintendent and the staff here in Monona. We need to work together. This is not just a school thing, a school issue. This is everybody. If we're not going to be part of the solution, we're going to be part of the doggone problem. And everyone out there needs to be aware. And there's been a lot of folks out here in Cottage Grove that have stepped up to try to do their best. And stuff has been starting to work better. And we're still working at it. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank all of you right here, even out there in the community that has done work out there to get this stuff done. This is COVID. I've never been the only pandemic I've been in is what I still live as a Black man. Yes, I'm a living pandemic. If I ain't gonna catch COVID, I might catch a bullet. That's how I live. But I am going to commend everyone here doing this work and trying to get these kids educated the best we can, safely and professionally. So I'm done. I know what I want to do. Peter?
I'm not ready to make a decision. I think the decision point for us is whether we start with second quarter, the 4K2. I think I know which way I'm leaning. I think what I've heard from the community, but I would like to see some more data. I would like to see us at the very least shoot up a survey in the next week. And also if we can get some engagement snapshot data back, I think it'll know what it will say, but I'm not going to take any bets on it. I'm going to ask the question. I want to get the answers before we move forward. And then, and hopefully we can do that within a short period of time, and I'm happy to have another special meeting next week or at the end of next week or whatever it takes, or at our October 14th meeting to discuss this and come to a decision. But I would really, I think this right now, this is unprecedented, and getting community feedback and engagement is, I think, critical at this moment. I do think we have not done a very good job with the community engagement and community communication, and I think we need to do a better job. And I want to be sure that, and my comment on that is, we have a tendency in this district to want to make sure we really have everything in a row before we let it out to the public, before we make a statement on it. And I think it's more important. It's okay to say we don't know yet. It's okay to say these plans are in development, or these things are what we're thinking, and let people see that, keep people in the loop so that they understand that this is a work in, they will understand that this is a work in progress, but people need to feel like they are in the loop, both our staff and our parents and our community at these unprecedented times. So I do think the other thing we need to do going forward is work really hard on increasing the communication with the community. But in terms of this decision, I want a little bit more data, and I would ask my board members, I'd throw that out there, get a little bit more data. Let's agree on exactly what we want to see, and then come back and commit to coming back as soon as possible to make a decision on this. Thanks.
So
Go ahead,
Dan, can we get is it possible to get a survey out? I guess that's my first question. What would be the timeline on that? And then my second question is, can the board have some input on what's on that survey? Like, for instance, I would like to see I know the 4-day thing has a lot of logistical things, but I would like to see what the feedback is from the public on that. I would like to see that. So I'm wondering if where are we at with those two things?
Sure. So I think the first thing is, as you mentioned, I think we need consensus from the board what exactly needs to be on the survey. And I think depending on how detailed that is how long it will take to complete and get, get appropriate feedback. So I would say that pretty definitively that we would not have survey results for the regular board meeting next Wednesday. We also have a pretty full agenda already. So I would suggest we'd call a special meeting to consider. And I think once we get consensus on what would be on this survey, it can give you a better indication of how long it might take to get that data. But typically, you want to give some time to get full results. It's not just a day or two. It's usually a couple of weeks. So we could probably shorten that up. But we need to build to come to agreement on what exactly what data we're actually looking for.
So it's reasonable to say if we were going to have a survey that was put out, it would not be in time to do any sort of in-person learning by the November 9th date of this plan.
I think it'd be a real challenge to continue to use November 9th as a target date, yes.
Okay.
Can I ask a question then?
Mhm.
Given the fact that if we voted on this tonight, we decide to go with this option as a possibility, we would have to do a survey to find out how many parents wanted to do it in order to make it happen by November 9th. So that confuses me a little bit. If we keep the survey simple and it simply asks, and I think parents would need a really clear explanation of what this model is and how it looks. If you have choice A is continue with virtual as is, choice B is your family would select this option of the A-B schedule. That's the only option. What would you choose? And that would tell me all I would need to know, I guess, to make a decision. If the rest of the board isn't ready to make a decision tonight. So I don't know why we would need 2 weeks for that. I mean, for one survey like that, if it could go out by Thursday, I mean, I don't know. I know you all have a lot to do, but if you could put together a survey within a couple of days and get it out and say it needs to be back by Tuesday, I don't know how long it takes to go through the results either, but we could maybe get that back. I guess I'm just saying if we made a decision tonight, we'd have to do that survey anyway.
I had the same question as
yeah.
Susan. I think that's
So
a great
then it would-
question, Susan.
So I don't see why we
Sure.
couldn't do it faster.
Well, what I heard was several other survey questions from board members
And
besides that.
Personally, that's the only question I would ask because I don't see any value in asking for, more in-person days because I just can't imagine. That strikes me as so divisive. I mean, even if you had, I think first of all, it would be likely that parents who want their kids back in person would choose that over the 2-day. I would personally, if I were making a choice for my kid right now, I'd probably stay virtual, but I understand there's some parents who have different thoughts. And I just think there's no way to do it. And I think we can't, then it would be more upheaval because even if you had like 20 families that wanted to do that and you did it, you would, as soon as you brought in another grade level, you'd have to stop doing it because you'd need the space. I just think that to me, it just doesn't make any sense to do that. So I don't have the need. And I assume parents who would make a choice and decide that they really wanted this option hybrid, I assume they would make that choice partly due to the fact that they feel their child is not so engaged. So I think, Peter, it covers kind of what you're saying too, because I think if they feel their child's pretty engaged right now, they'd be more likely to stay with the virtual. I think it's the ones that we've heard from who are saying, this isn't working for my child. I need something else. I think they would be more likely maybe to choose the hybrid. I'm not saying we don't need that. It would be nice to have that information too, and maybe you could get it anecdotally from teachers. What are they noticing without asking them to do a whole lot?
And the survey's going to the parents, is getting the parents' perspective on it. What I want is the data from the teachers. I think that perspective is important for this too.
I do too. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I do too. I assumed that we were going to get that as well, Dan, but I would like that as well.
Agree.
I would say on a survey that what we do first, and Eric, I certainly understand where you're coming from. I do not want to minimize the importance of it, but I think also we do want to get quick information back. Is first question we ask is to 4K parents, 4K2 parents. Right. We can do more for other parents with a little more runway, but we want to make this decision on 4K2. And it would be a simple and straightforward survey about the options that we have on the table, because anything else, 4 days or anything, is going to take longer anyway, and we can ask about that longer. But a simple question that we can get feedback rapidly. But the important thing is, to ask your question, Eric, is that I think that we ask an open-ended question on there also, and let people make comments about what else they would like to see and what else they like to want. And then we can go beyond that for additional questioning later. But I do think we have to wrap up this 4K2 question quickly.
That's fine. I do not, I'm ready to, I can vote on a survey. I can vote on this plan. I'm ready to vote on anything the board wants to vote on. I already gave my thoughts on the plan as presented. I still really think there's an important equity piece with the 2-day model compared to the virtual model. I think that as a teacher myself, that's the first thing that jumped out at me, and I have some real issues with that. So I'm ready to vote on it. But if we do a survey and we're not going to include the option for 4-day in-person learning, there certainly should be at least a comment section. I don't know why we wouldn't be able to do that. It would give us a lot of information. We could word the survey. So, if there's not a 4-day option, would you support a 2-day option? We can say things like that to get feedback in case we can't logistically do the 4-day option, but I don't know why we wouldn't want to ask that question personally. That's how I feel about it. So.
Okay. So it sounds
Andrew,
like
can I just ask one question? It would be helpful for me to understand how the board feels about on this survey. So I think one of the things I'm struggling with too, again, I'm interested in parents who are the number of parents who are supporting, full back to school, but it's my impression from administration that we can't offer that right now. So if we ask that question, it has to be very clear that although it's not available from a safety point of view and we can't offer it at this time, would you support it? Again, I'm struggling with how to do that. Susan, I agree that we should ask about the 2 choices that we have. I think that's a great approach. It's simple, it's straightforward.
I certainly don't mind having an open-ended question. I just wanted to keep the survey as simple as possible. Yeah. And my understanding was this was what we were going to make a decision on whether to approve this or not. I was hearing from, we haven't heard from necessarily all of us, but what I was starting to hear is that people didn't feel comfortable voting tonight because they wanted to have some idea of how many parents might choose this option. And so if that's what it takes for us to make a decision, then I think we should just do it and do it quickly. I don't mind having an open-ended thing for people to write comments and how in the future they'd like more days and whatever. I think we all would, but again, it does become logistical. I guess when the Dane County numbers go down, so we can bring the 3 through 5 back pretty soon too, but that sure doesn't look that way right now. So, yeah.
I guess, and this is really a question for you, Eric. I fundamentally not understanding why we would have that question. Like when I think about survey, right? So I'm thinking, what's the purpose of a survey? To gather feedback, to get data, and for the purposes of planning. And if what we've been told is that it's not possible for us to do 4-day, half-day, and half-day.
Elizabeth, we don't know that though yet. We don't know that for sure until we get a gauge on how many people would be interested. So that I don't think we have the data to make that decision, to just assume that.
Because, wait, sorry, because theoretically, I'm just trying to like play it out because I'm not fully following. So like theoretically, just like using round numbers, but like Elizabeth, not round numbers, not Jared. So they have to be small. So 20 people want to go back for 4 days a week and 4 days a week. And theoretically, we could manage that because 10 and 10 would work. 30 people want to go back or 40 people want to go back. Now we can't because it's 2020.
Right. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yeah. So. I got it now. I was just like, I was a little slow on the uptake there, Eric. Thank you.
So, like I said, listening to everyone with the ideas, my suggestion is to keep all virtual for the second quarter. While in the second quarter, we can get these surveys out with everything we just talked about to get that feedback, because I don't want to put more pressure and planning on the teachers in a short time. And Eric, you're a teacher, you know about that, getting that curriculum ready if we did something else, you know, with the 4 days. If we said, let's do the 4 days for the second quarter, well, we don't have, you know, we don't have the surveys, we don't have this, and we don't want to put pressure on the teachers who have already got these plans. So if we do go virtual for the second quarter, now we got the time to get all of the information from the teachers, the families, and the community, and figure out, now we have the numbers and the data to say, start the third quarter, as COVID is going down, this is all the options we could do. And this is what parents and this is what the parents would like to do. This is what the teachers would like to do. I just want to give this staff some time so they can get their stuff prepared. I'm not trying to put no pressure on them. They've been in pressure enough since March. Okay. I don't want to do that. So that's why I said I'm ready to vote for what we need to do for the second quarter, and then add in all the questions that the board wants to put on a survey to get to the parents and the teachers so we can start working for the next semester. Elizabeth.
So I'm not disagreeing with you in concept, Andrew. I think where I struggle with just that is the broadness of it. And I worry that, so we can make a determination, right? Like we'll kick the can down the road until the end of the semester. Great, that's fine. But for me, I think we need, if we're going to do that, then we need really tight timelines around what we're gathering, how we're gathering it, how we're getting continuous information from staff, how we're getting like continuous communication out to families, better than, I guess, for lack of a more generous word, than we currently have, right? Because it was sort of nebulous. And now here we are on October 6th, supposed to make a decision. And it was like, oh, we don't have the information that we need. And my concern is that what changes are we going to make so that we're not kind of nebulous, and then whatever the October 6th equivalent is before the end of second quarter, we're in the same position again. And so that's my caveat there. So I don't disagree with you, but I think we need a plan.
That's the whole thing. We can plan right now. Second quarter doesn't end until the middle of January. We're talking about between now and the end of first quarter, which is November 8th, and putting the pressure on. If we made a decision of saying they go hybrid, well, all these teachers got to do all this stuff with no data. And what the board is asking is for some more data. So the obvious choice is for second quarter is to go all virtual. And while that is going on during that second quarter, we will have plenty of time making those time deadlines to get all of that stuff in so we can be prepared for the second semester and start bringing kids back in. Peter.
You know, the administration has put a proposal to go to, with second quarter, go to a hybrid model. If they weren't comfortable, if they didn't believe that they couldn't deliver that, they wouldn't have put the proposal before us. So I'm comfortable with their judgment that that's something that they can do. I trust their judgment to know what their bandwidth is, what their capability is, so they can do that. The question is the decision: do we want to do this? You're prepared to say no. I without more information from parents, I am not ready to make that decision. I think I know what's going to happen, but I still want to get that input before we make a decision. And I have to say that this is the first time I've sort of faced a decision like this on this board. And this is why I'm insisting on parent input, because it's not just a purely educational and instructional decision that we're making here. We're talking about a judgment call about health and safety versus educational model. And that is a unique situation. And I think we should have unique respect for the input we're getting from the families and parents out there right now. This is a unique situation, and that's why I want to go that way. I think it's incumbent on us.
So Peter, so the quickest way I think that we can get some information, and Katie may be able to draw this up, is do a Google Doc form, or what's that, the Google form, or the Google, you know, when they do the questions, you can answer it and they get right back to you instead of doing mailings. Because we need this information. It sounds like we need it ASAP.
Survey monkey kind of thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm feeling the same way. I mean, I think the thing is, if the numbers in Dane County and Wisconsin in particular, I mean, we're one of the worst in the country right now. If they don't start to get better, there's no reason to think we should even be surveying people during the second quarter for the older grades, because those metrics are higher and we're nowhere near that right now. So that's like out of sight for right now, I think. I think we're only talking about 4K2. And the only reason we're talking about 4K2 is because they hit the metrics back in August. They're not hitting them right now. But when you combine that with the other information from public health, where they're saying they're not seeing a lot of spread in school so far with that age group, you know, the administration has made this recommendation as something that could work and that is educationally sound. So I think to me, it does make sense to ask parents to see how many of them support this model. That's what we're prepared to offer. And I think it's a hard choice. I think, you know, it seems to me they have to balance some of the deficits of, you know, 2 days a week in person with what they feel for their child is the value of that personal contact. And that is different for every family to make that decision. I don't think it addresses, you know, some of the other things we're hearing about childcare issues and that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily address that. I'm not sure we can address that. But I think this is something that it sounds like our administration, putting a lot of thought into it, feels we can offer safely. You know, if it turns out that we're wrong about that, we'd have to close up and go back to virtual again. But I guess I would like to hear if there really are a substantial number of families who would choose this option. And as I said, I probably wouldn't choose it for myself, but there might be some people, as an educator, I think the virtual thing.
So basically, so it sounds like if we did a survey, so if we did a Survey Monkey and got all this information in by Tuesday before our board meeting, and we got all this information, we should be able to make a decision on Wednesday.
That's not enough time.
See, that's what I was saying.
So why don't we call a special meeting for the 19th, 20th, or 21st? That gives you another week to do the survey and get the information.
Look, if somebody wants to make a motion to vote on the plan as presented, I'm ready to vote. I mean, I don't know how the other board members feel, but I know how I would vote. So if the rest of the board members are ready to vote on what the plan is presented, someone can make a motion. I'm not going to make it, but someone's, you know, can make a motion and we could vote on the plan as presented, and then Dan and Katie in the district can create the survey and send it out. My request would be we have a little input on the survey, but I'm ready to vote. So if somebody wants to make that motion, or if we want to make a different motion to send out a survey first, I'm ready to do that too. I don't know. I'm not a good motion maker because I'm a little bit new on the board. So
I would point out that one of the things is that there's sort of an asymmetry in this decision, which is if we decide tonight that we should pursue this, we can always back out of that before November 9th. We can always say, oh, conditions have worsened, we're just not going to implement it, even that we're preparing to implement it. It's not going to be set in stone tonight. However, we say, no, we can't do this tonight, then we probably can't undo that decision before November 9th, probably. Does that make sense?
Dan, were you going to share something?
Yeah, if I could. All right, so I'd like to go back to the purpose of the plan. In July, you approved the return to learning plan. In that plan, we explicitly said that we have prepared a hybrid model that is 2 days a week in-person learning, 3 days a week virtual. I was not expecting you to debate the plan tonight. My expectation was that you would make a decision whether or not students are going to return in a hybrid plan at the beginning of second quarter, or if you're not comfortable with that based upon the current number of positive cases in the county, to defer to a later time. I am not recommending that you bring students back at the second quarter. I provided you 2 options. If you would like to now revisit the hybrid model, that's fine. That's your prerogative, but that's an entirely different discussion. If you were to vote to return students for second quarter, we would not do an anonymous survey. We would contact every parent and they would register. Are you going to send your child, or are you going to keep them home in virtual? That's very different than doing an anonymous survey of what is your preference. And then that's fine. We can do any of those options, but I just want to be clear, that we need to, separate that. If we are going to go on the road of asking for additional data for you to make a decision, okay, and that's fine, but as a board, you need to reach consensus on that. You can't do it through a survey monkey. You need to have a notice meeting and discuss and come to consensus on the survey questions, which we can do immediately. We don't have to wait for that. But I just want to be clear about, what it is that you are deciding. You have all kinds of options here, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't, reconsider and change course, but we need to be clear about the difference, between what is in the written proposal, the options as presented, versus changing those options or requiring additional data before you can vote on those options.
But Dan, I have a problem with the way that this was presented, and it wasn't listed as an action item on the agenda. That's why I'm wondering if it can be voted on.
It is. So that is listed as consideration, which means action, and then on board docs, it is noted that it is an action item.
Okay, so I'll make a motion then. I'll make a motion right now to approve. I'll make a motion to approve the reopening plan using the PHMDC reopening metric guidelines, CDC indicators and thresholds for 4K 312 as presented.
I'll second that. So
any more? Okay, so we got a first and second. Any more discussion on it? Peter, and then Susan, Manning, and then Elizabeth.
First of all, I want to clarify the nature of the motion. This would be to approve offering a virtual option and a hybrid option on starting November 9th, which was the second quarter, with the plan as presented.
Yes. Susan,
correct?
Manning?
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so you turn to administration and the staff and you say, what's the teacher's input on this plan? And I don't have that information. And so you're asking me as a board member to sit here and make this decision without knowing how the teachers who are going to be implementing this plan feel. And I think that is unfair and unwise.
What part of it, Susan? Because what is presented is continuing to do virtual, and with the 4K, and what's that, 4K to 2 with that option. That's what's only the thing. It's nothing else. It's just what's there.
Okay, so restate the motion.
I made a motion to approve the reopening plan following the PHMDC reopening metric guidelines and CDC indicators and thresholds for virtual and online learning grades 4K through 2, grades 3 through 12 as presented.
So it's only for, the motion only includes virtual.
No.
No, virtual and
Yeah.
hybrid. I didn't say hybrid, but as hybrid, as presented.
That was my impression.
Yeah.
I have no input from the staff who will be teaching the in-person hybrid.
That's why you can vote on it.
That's why I can vote on it
Well, yeah, I'm saying that
without the input?
you have to vote on it now because it was seconded, so you're gonna have to vote.
We can post, so we have
I think
options.
that's very humorous, Eric.
No, I'm just going by the way that it's done, Susan. I'm not trying to say, I'm not. No, hold on, Peter. No, stop. You're
Eric is
misunderstanding.
right.
You're misunderstanding, Susan, what I did. I made a motion because I thought that, that's what someone needed to do to move this process forward. I'm not going to vote yes on it. So I made it because I think we have to get to a point and find out which board members agree and which board members do not agree. And that's why I made it. And that's the only reason why. So when I say you can vote, I agree with almost everything you're saying. That's why I'm going to vote no, because I don't agree with it. So at least we'll know how the other board members feel. That's why I did that.
Okay. Peter?
The appropriate thing, Susan, to do if you're uncomfortable making a decision at this time is to make a motion to postpone. And the nice thing about this is that it lays out what the board feels, what it is we want to do, rather than arguing about it. And it gives the administration guidance what they want to do. So, Susan, if you're not comfortable making a decision, or you want more, like I'm asking for additional information before making this decision, the appropriate thing to do is to make a motion to postpone.
But don't we have to vote on this one first?
No, it's a postpone.
Okay, so let's do that. I'd make a motion to postpone until we have teacher feedback on the in-person learning.
Say parent, teacher and parent.
Teacher and parent.
Wait,
Input
but-
on the.
I made a motion and it was seconded. Don't we have to vote on that?
No, so what we're
This is an
doing is
interventional motion.
we're making a motion that modifies your motion.
Okay, I don't know about this, so I hope you guys understand how this.
Yeah.
Okay, because I think from my understanding of Robert's rules, which we agreed that we're going to use, once a motion is made and seconded, that we have to vote on that motion, and then a new motion could be made, or there can be an amendment.
There's different levels of motion.
Take it up.
There's different levels of emotion. So if you make a primary motion, you can make a secondary to do something like amend it or postpone it, or various or do different things with it.
You seconded.
And then we come.
You seconded it.
What's it? Yes, right. I did.
Oh, okay.
So even if it's seconded, then you can say, then it becomes appropriate to say to make a motion to postpone.
Is that true?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay. I don't remember, and I don't know for sure. That's why I'm asking. I'm asking a clarifying question.
And so what it means is that if a board member needs more information, they can ask other board members, and if the other board members don't need more information, they can make a motion to postpone. It doesn't get seconded or it doesn't get approved. And then we go back to the main motion and we can vote on
It
that.
doesn't sound right to me, but I'm going to look it up after this.
All right, I'll show you the book.
Okay, so we just had the motion to postpone.
Right.
Okay.
Now you would entertain discussion of that motion to postpone.
No, there hasn't been a second, so it may fail for lack of a second.
I second.
All right. Now, any
Thank you,
discussion?
Susan.
So let me ask a clarifying question again. So anytime somebody seconds a motion, another board member can make another motion to postpone that motion. Is that true? For any vote, for any time?
Yes, for any main motion, yours is a main motion. So we can vote to postpone. If we're not ready to vote on it, we can vote to postpone it.
Why wouldn't we just vote and see what how everybody feels?
Because if it goes,
that's going to tell us information.
okay, we won't get it. We shouldn't get into debating why Roberts does this, that, or the other thing at this point. But it's so we can have a reasonable decision-making process. The postponement has been seconded.
All right, I don't agree with any of this, but that's fine. I'm gonna let you guys do what you want to.
All right. Whoever, all in favor of
We got to
postponing?
discuss it first.
You were discussing.
All right,
Well-
are we done?
It sound like, are we done?
Mhm.
Okay, we're done. So all in favor, we're going to do the vote. Elizabeth?
Can you read the
Can someone
motion?
describe what are we voting on the motion to postpone the motion?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
And then what happens after this?
That's why we should have some discussion. Is what's
That's-
the purpose of
Please
postponing it?
someone explain to me. I've been on the board for 3 months. I have no idea what's happening. And
Purpose
I
of
suspect
postponing it would be
that
good.
the
to hear.
folks watching live
Exactly.
also don't understand what's
Yeah,
happening.
this is-
So
The purpose of what I would ask for a postponement is until our next meeting, until we can get feedback specifically from 4K to 2 parents on the on what they feel about whether or not we should offer this option. So I've asked for a postponement to either our next meeting or to our special meeting, our next regular board meeting, or I would expect this postponement to be to our next board meeting or until a special meeting next week where we can get feedback from 4K to 2 students. Parents, not students, parents.
All right.
That's what I would ask for.
All right. So it's been,
Well, I would also then want, if we're gonna get feedback, I would like to hear what teachers think. I don't know if it would put principals on the spot, maybe to know if you've gotten feedback. I mean, my understanding was there was some positive feedback, but I don't know to what extent. I don't know.
I guess I'd ask the board, please check your email. I did send you several emails about the process of this and including teacher feedback. So I'll be glad to put it together and resend it, but.
Yeah.
okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do the
So,
vote.
Andrew,
Okay.
I don't know if this helps, but I ask, can you make a motion to postpone? And it said, using Robert's Rules of Orders, newly revised, action on a pending question may be postponed to another time. Alternately, a motion can be postponed until after a specific event has occurred, if you want to make it a specific event. We're just talking about postponing this motion and then we can decide. So I don't know if that helps.
You know, it helps. We it's been motion, it's been second. Start to go ahead, roll call vote, starting with Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Elizabeth Cook,
nay.
Eric Hart,
Nay.
Peter Sobel,
Aye.
Lorene Gage,
Aye.
Andrew McKinney, nay. Ayes have it, motion carries. So it'll be postponed to our next regular board meeting or the upcoming special meeting. All right.
So I agree, Andrew, I'm sorry, I didn't make that motion more specific. I actually support the parents who feel they need to go back in person. And I want us to be able to go forward and offer that option. So I appreciate that you're saying we're going to take this on again soon. All I want is a little bit of input from the teaching staff. I need that to feel comfortable in my decision.
And the parents.
And the parents. And the parents.
Okay. Don't forget
Making a
them.
final decision as an elected official of this community. I need to know how they feel.
So
All right.
the postponement clarification question, this motion was postponed, which means when does it come up again?
Andrew just said it would be either at a
Okay.
special meeting or the meeting next week.
But then there could be no changes to the plan as it was written?
Yeah.
We could.
No,
we
he can
could
do,
amend-
he can
you
do
can
anything
always
he
But
wants.
not with regard to this motion, the motion was to approve the plan as written. And we postponed that motion. And generally, when you postpone a motion, it's a way to kill something that you don't
Can
really
be.
want to make a decision on, which I don't think that's the intent in this case.
Right.
Clearly, we're all kind of uncomfortable with this. But I think the fact that enough people have said they wanted to hear some more input from teachers and some more input from parents, okay, let's do this. But I'm doing it in the spirit of, yes, we are going to take this up next week, because I don't think it's fair to
Me
keep
too.
dragging it
Me
out.
too.
I was kind of prepared to make a decision tonight, but I'm okay with putting it off for a week, and let's just but I think this, whatever survey goes out should be very simple, and
I agree.
they're probably
Quick.
the people that were listening have given up on us by now, but it should just, those two things of how many, just to find out, would you support, or would you be, as a parent, would you be likely to select this hybrid option? Spell it out. They can compare the two things. Would you be likely to retain your virtual option? Just if we feel like we want to get an idea of numbers. And then with the teachers, same thing. Do you feel that this is a sound educational option? And I think, but
Susan, can I
I
clarify?
think
Those are two different questions.
that,
Are
well,
we asking teachers if they think we should offer an option to return, or on the type of option?
Well, that's a good question.
We've already surveyed them on the types of options.
Right. We already have, and that's right. And they already had input on the types. And I thought there was some agreement with this, and I thought they appreciated.
Yeah,
I think that there's some aspects of this, so I'm not really sure, other than we're saying how many of you think we should even be bringing kids back. Is that what you're asking, Susan?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, it's not clear to me. That part's not clear to me. So,
Are the 4K teachers comfortable coming back and teaching in the classroom? I just want some input on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Dan's point, I think that we've gotten really great board documentation for us prepared around teacher input in terms of this planning process. I do think, though, for the purposes of planning for our information, but also for district planning, it's good to know, how many teachers are, would prefer to come back, comfortable to come back, absolutely not comfortable, right? Because then that helps to think about like what that even looks like. So I think that it can serve multiple purposes.
Okay, so Dan, did you do that?
Okay,
With the teachers?
I asked for that during the meeting, Andrew. I asked for that. Otherwise, I wouldn't be asking for it now.
Okay, as far as surveying teachers about their comfort level of returning to in-person teaching, the last time we surveyed was summer. Okay, so we do not have current data on that. So I'll be glad to survey that.
All right, I just want to make sure we need to let Dan do his job. I don't want to keep nitpicking. Let him do his job. Okay, we're just here to give him support. We need to quit this nitpick. Let's get that out, please. Thank you. Any further discussion on anything? Because I would like to have an adjournment right now.
I mean, I have a question. So Dan, you said before that you weren't going to be able to do a survey till we had a vote, till we decided on the plan. But now that we postponed that plan, are you still planning on doing a survey? I'm confused.
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. So if we have clear consensus that you as a board want to have these survey results, that's fine. But I think we need to be clear on that. So what I'm hearing is that we want to survey from teachers about their comfort level of returning to in-person instruction, and we want to survey from parents about what choice would they make if we offered the opportunity for in-person at the beginning of the second quarter.
Right. Okay.
This hybrid plan.
Correct.
I would like a show of hands from the board on those two questions to see if there's a consensus for both of those things. From Dan, I want to support this. Obviously, the second one. I'm not sure what we wanted to ask. The first
I would also support this.
Hang on one second. In terms of what the survey questions are that you are sending out, I trust you and Katie and your staff to do that without us coming back and having another meeting to approve the survey questions. I think you've heard the discussion, and I think you know what to do. And in terms of in the interest of speeding the process along, I have total faith in you to go out and put together a simple survey for parents and get that information back to us without any additional input from us beyond what we're going to talk about right here.
I agree.
Does everybody agree that they can do that without coming back to us?
Are you getting input from all teachers or just 4K through 2?
My impression would be 4K through 2.
Yeah,
I would like,
that's what I would think. And even that could be.
I agree.
problematic, but
I would think it should be all teachers.
well, we're only
Let's
talking-
just start with the 4K2 for right
Alright,
now, so we
that's all
can
we're
make this.
talking about right
I don't agree with it.
Okay, so do we have consensus though? Consensus is a majority of the board. Do we have consensus that we want the survey for 4K2 and parents? Yes.
You're gonna do survey.
Okay.
Nodding.
I
That's all
guess. I
it
don't
makes
know.
I feel a little torn about it because I think it puts us in it can create an awkward situation.
We're making everything so doggone
We are
difficult.
making it harder.
He's got it right here in writing. The choices.
Right.
4K has an option 1 and 2, and then 3 through 12 is all virtual. That's
We-
all we're talking
We
about.
just agreed with that, Andrew.
Okay. So we're done.
So why are you arguing with us? We just agreed with it.
No, he's
I
saying
haven't
we're making
had
it
my
harder because
juice.
we didn't agree to it. We agreed to postpone it, which is just
Yeah.
putting it off for a week. And I don't
And-
know if we're gonna
Yeah.
be in any better shape in a week than we
Jared-
are right now, honestly.
And
I
Jared,
am.
we need you to deliver strawberry milk too.
We should have just voted on it. I don't know why we didn't vote on it.
I know.
Jared's
All
laughing.
right,
That's a good sign. He's still
we're
laughing.
done. Can I have a
Everyone's laughing at us, so that's a good
All right.
sign.
I'll move to adjourn. If we're ready. Are you ready for that?
A second.
right?
Adjournment is not
Okay.
debatable.
All in favor? Lorraine,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Susan, Manning, Susan Fox,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
I
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, ayes have it. Motion carries. All right, Dan, I will talk with you in the morning. Everybody have a good night.
Yeah.